All right, so just going to give you guys a quick introduction here. My name's Zak Jobes. We're here with the Quick Bytes seminar at South Shore Marine. We had a little bit of audio issues off the bat here, so just want to tell you guys kind of what we have in store for today. I'm going to be talking about inline planer boards and how to retrieve those and how to be more efficient on the water. And also we have Marc Bottone from My Bonnie Charters. He'll be talking about Dipsy Divers, spoon fishing, and how you guys can be more efficient doing that. And also Lucas Hahn, who is a tournament angler on the Lake Erie Walleye Trail and is going to give you guys some insights on how to target those trophy walleye for tournament fishing. So really have a great day in store for you guys. If you are watching on any of our live feeds that we have, please feel free to type in any questions you might have, and then we can try to answer those best we can as we go along. Really appreciate South Shore Marine having us here today, and want to kind of talk to you guys about why we're here today. And it's for our charity events, our charity organizations that we're raising money for, one being Walleye for Wounded Heroes, and also the Youth Challenge organization that are really near and dear to my heart. And I know Mark and Luke would say the same thing. They're both great organizations. So if you guys are able to, we're going to share a link to our raffle. You can go on there and you can buy raffle tickets and have a chance at winning some great prizes. There's over $4,000 worth of prizes you can win. They're giving away rod holder gift certificates from Cisco Fishing System. Warrior Lures donated some things. There's a tournament entry fee for the Lake Erie Walleye Trail. A lot of cool prizes, so please be sure to check that out. So jumping back into where we were at here, talking about setting your planer boards. I talked about the board setup. So basically spreading the boards out. That's really important. Using the clicker reel, we talked about that. So the thing we want to keep in mind is we want to have that nice spread on our lines and kind of have, go to the PowerPoint here, jumping ahead. We want to have that nice spread. All our boards are going to be in line there, but the one thing we want to keep in mind is, and Luke is going to talk a little bit about snap weights in his presentation, but if we have a snap weight on our line, it's going to pull that board back and it's going to kind of keep that board out of line. Very important to keep in mind when I talk about retrieving the boards. All right, so retrieving the boards. This is really the meat and potatoes of the seminar, and it's hopefully something that you guys can learn from today, because with all the fish in the lake, being efficient and not untangling lines a bunch is really important. So I'm going to hop up in the boat, talk about this. There's a few different methods that I use, but this is what the number one method that I like to use the most. All right, so very rarely do I run more than 4 rods on each side. It seems to me like I run more than that, and it gets busy in the boat. I have a 21-foot boat that I fish out of Vexus, and there's just not a lot of room. Now, if I have like a charter boat and I have a lot of guys with me, yeah, I can run 6 boards on each side, no problem. But usually it's just 2 or 3 guys, so 4 boards on each side keeps us pretty busy. So again, talked about how we are going to clip this on our line. Say I have 3 planer boards on each side. My favorite setup, guys, I'll tell you, is typically in the summer, 2, 3 boards on each side, 1, 2 dipsies on each side. I'm 90% of the time in the summertime, I always have a dipsy out. All right, so I have 3 boards, and my outside board has a fish on it. So what's going to happen is the board is going to slide back, the flag is going to go down. Now, what I will do a lot of times is if it's a bigger fish, the board is going to slide to the back of the boat. So I'll have my partner that's reeling the fish in. He will go to the opposite side of the boat. So I would walk over here to this side of the boat. So let's say the fish is on this side. Jamie, if you can zoom in, I'm going to walk all the way to the corner of the boat, I'm going to keep my rod at about probably about a 45-degree angle, up a little higher. I'm going to keep tension on that fish, nice, slow, steady reel. That board is going to be sticking up because it has the fish on it, and it should clear your 2 inside boards. So I'll bring that board, it'll come to the back of the boat. I'll have my partner take it off, and then you know, we can net the fish. That's one way of doing it, and that's usually typically when it's a bigger fish. If it's a small fish, it's not going to pull that board back far enough. So I'm going to talk to you guys about how we would bring the boards in. I have a small fish on my outside board. I have 2 boards on the inside. I would have my partner reel the inside board in. I would have him go over to this side of the boat, and see right here I have an empty rod holder. He's just going to simply put that in that rod holder. That lure is still fishing, so I'm still being efficient. I can't tell you how many times that rod that's just sitting in that rod holder has pulled my biggest fish of the day, just hanging out behind the boat. He'll go over, he'll reel that middle board in. I'm nice, slow, steady reel on my fish. He'll bring that middle board in. He'll either hold it in his hand out the back of the boat or bring it in all the way. And then I have the whole side of the boat to fight that fish and bring that fish in. It's the same thing if I'm clearing lures. You know, I don't, when I'm pulling crankbaits or anything like that, I don't go to the front of the boat and try to get ahead of the boards. You know, I don't try to swing it behind the lines or anything like that, because when I do that, I'm going to run into problems. I'm going to run into tangles. Now, one thing to keep in mind is we talked about snap weights. I'll go back to the stage here. We talked about snap weights. If we're running snap weights, pretty much all the time, I'm going to bring those boards in like we talked about. I'm not going to try to swing it behind the boards like I showed you by going to the corner of the boat. And the reason is that line is running pretty deep. It's closer to bottom, and I get a fish on, it's most certainly going to run into those other rods. So really thinking about where that line is in the water and where my, you know, where the fish is taking me is pretty important. And if you guys are just starting off doing this, I can tell you the biggest piece of advice I can give to you is less is more. Start off running 2 boards on each side. Start off running 3 boards on each side. The better you get at this, the more rods you can put out. We're allowed to run 3 rods a piece now in Lake Erie, so we can run quite a few rods. I can tell you, there's not too many days where I'm out there running 9, you know, 8, 9 rods, and it's not a fire drill. There's just so many fish in the lake right now. Sometimes it's really hard to keep up on reeling the fish in. So we talked about retrieving the boards. There are a few different methods that we can use. So we talked about, you know, bringing the inside boards in. That's the most common method that I use, that and going to the corner of the boat. But there are a few different methods. Oh.
Hey, Zach, a couple questions for you.
Yeah. Yep.
Watchers. They would like to know why you don't want the line to come out of the release when bringing a fish in, rather have that line stay in the release.
The release meaning the...
Correct, the front toe.
So I'm actually getting ready to talk about that.
Okay.
I prefer to just have that nice tension on that rod. There is a different technique that a few people use called the Sam's clip release. And I'll have you zoom in on this, Jamie. This is one of the other methods that we can use. But we can take this Sam's clip release. This is from Offshore Tackle. And I can replace it with the OR18 clip. This OR18 clip is just what I've always used and what I've been used to. I can tell you probably 90% of the tournament anglers either use this OR18 clip or red clip on the front. But the other thing that we can use is this Sam's clip release. And what this does is I can open it up. This is really cool. And it's something that I haven't done, but I'm probably going to play around with. I can open that up, put my line behind there, snap the release, and then I have, you know, 4 rods on each side or whatever. I get a fish on my outside board. I can and the tension is adjustable on this, I can trip that board. So that clip will open up, and what will happen is my line will release from that, my board will go back, and then the fish will be at the back of the boat and I can reel it in. That's one of the other really effective ways to do this, and I was just getting ready to jump into that, so I'm glad that question came up. If you go on to Offshore's website, they have videos that actually will show you on the water action, you know, of how to do that. But a really good question, and also another really effective way. Just not what I do when I'm tournament fishing or on the water on a daily occurrence. So, well, if we can go to, there we go, cool, thank you. So the board shuffle is kind of what I talked about, where we're reeling the rods in, I'm putting one on the other side, having my partner hold the one out of the back of the boat. And then when I'm letting it back out, a lot of times what I'll do is that one that I might have on the, hanging out the back of the boat, I'll just let that one out on the outside, especially if I'm running similar leads. I'll just let that one run out on the outside, and I'll have my partner, you know, he'll be in the bottom of the boat undoing the fish, putting it in the live well, and then that rod that was on the outside, now it's my inside board. So that's what's called the board shuffle. And then the front of the boat method, it's not something that I use too often, but if I'm out pulling spinners with inline weights and say, you know, I have a fish, pull the board back and then it gets off, well, now I probably don't have a worm. That's my outside rod. What I can do is I can go all the way to the front of the boat, put my rod up in the air, reel real fast, and a lot of times that board will skip ahead in front of the other boards that are on your middle and your inside, and then I can reel that in, put a new worm on it, make that my inside board, creep the other ones back out. So that's what's called the front of the boat method, and it's something that you'll see from time to time, but mostly for spinners. So we talked about some of the things you can add to the boards. If you guys have any questions about that, the best resource I can tell you is to just go to the Offshore Tackle website. They have all these how-to videos, all the product information on that. It talks, you know, it'll tell you the information on the Sam's clip and also the OR 18 snapper clip. Would highly recommend going with that tattle flag. The nice thing about the tattle flag that I didn't mention, Jamie, if you want to move in here, is they just came out about 2 years ago with this adjustable spring on the flag. And I love this because, you know, if I'm pulling, say I'm pulling a 1/2 ounce inline weight on Green Bay, or if I'm in Erie pulling a 1/2 ounce with spinners, I can adjust the tension on my flag. So I can make it pretty loose to where it'll be able to handle a lighter weight. But say I'm pulling a reef runner with a 1 ounce, 2 ounce snap weight, I can adjust that to the max setting and it'll make it harder for that flag to go down. So that's a really great feature that they just came out with a couple years ago. There's no more, I don't use any more of the rubber bands or anything like that around my board like we used to. Do you guys have any questions about anything about retrieving the boards before I move on?
Questions real quick from some of our viewers. We had a question from Nathan and asks, do you loop the line around the OR18 clip?
I do. I loop the line around the OR18 clip. The reason for that is it's just extra insurance, so I can be sure that that's not popping off. A lot of times with these big fish, I've had instances where even when I do loop it, that front line will pop right out of that OR18 clip, and then it makes it really tough when you just have this clip when you're fighting the fish the way I do, bringing it in with the board shuffle technique. So that's what I do. The one thing with the OR18 clip that I did not mention, it's really important, is it has an adjustment on it, just like the Sam's clip does. So it's kind of important to find a sweet spot and I don't want it to be too tight on there because it'll nick my line, but I don't want it to be too loose to where that line is popping off all the time. But just find that sweet spot. Definitely make that loop in there just for insurance. Once you do it a few times, I can do it in my sleep. I don't even think about it. You just loop it on there and let the board out.
Another question too, Zach, when it comes to the Sam's Pro release, do you find in rougher water you have premature releases on that?
Yeah, that's honestly, that's the reason why I probably don't use the Sam's clip, and I never have, is it's just like a Dipsy diver. You gotta find the right tension, and if I'm in like 5-foot waves and that board is surging, there's a pretty good chance that I'm gonna be tripping that on its own. I have not played around with the Sam's clip release much, so I couldn't really tell you much about that, but yeah, that's one of the reasons why I don't use it, and you might want to watch about that. But when you're on a calm day and you got 8 rods out on each side, the Sam's clip is a really good clip for bringing rods in.
And then one more, and we'll let you get going again. Could you please review one more time your preferred way to bring your outside board in?
Yeah, so it's kind of dependent on how big the fish is, but if I have my outside board and I have 2 inside boards, so I'm running 3 on each side, even if I have 4, my outside board goes back. What I'll do is, and it's a pretty good, say it's a 5-6 pound fish, it's gonna pull that board back pretty far. I'm gonna take my rod, I'm gonna go to the opposite side of the boat that the fish is on, all the way to the corner of the boat. I'll put my rod at about a 45-degree angle. Nice, slow reel. Just keep tension on that board. The board will be standing up like this. I'll bring it in all the way to the back of the boat. I'll have my partner undo the board, and then I can fight the fish to the boat. So it's a pretty good method. I would say it works, you know, on the bigger fish. If you have a smaller fish, I do that board shuffle where I have my partner bring the inside boards in. So yeah, good questions. Awesome. Offshore products, talked about that. So the other thing that I want to talk about is kind of some of the mistakes that I see people making that are new to the game, or just weekend anglers that you know, yeah, I guess you can always learn a tip or two. So the mistake number one is, that I see a lot of people doing is, you know, they put in a Huron and they go, just point the boat north, just go to the pack of boats and just let the rods out and start fishing. Now, I mean, this can work. You know, the boats are there for a reason. They're obviously catching some fish, but I very rarely will you see me in a pack fishing. I've done way better on the outside of packs of boats, or using my electronics to find fish, or just fishing structure or areas where I know there's going to be fish. The thing about, you know, when you got a bunch of boats around is if those fish are up higher in the water column, what is going to happen is those fish are going to drop right back down to the bottom, or they're going to slide out away from the pack of boats. They're going to go neutral, negative. They're going to be tough to get. So that's one thing that I do see people making the mistake of, and it's something to definitely avoid if you can. Mistake number 2, and this is probably the biggest thing that you can do on Lake Erie, is not relying on your graph. If you're not marking fish on Lake Erie, you're not going to be catching fish. It's really important to have good quality electronics, and you don't have to get into anything fancy. There's a lot of products out there now, you know, Active Target, Live Scope, down imaging, and it can be mind-boggling. These companies are all trying to push, you know, these expensive electronics on us, and they can be great. They have their purpose, and I was just talking to Lucas and Marc earlier about the new Active Target and how that's going to be a game changer for places where we cast for walleye. But for Lake Erie, the most important thing is just having a good solid you know, electronic unit like Lowrance, Garmin, whatever you prefer, and just having a skimmer transducer to where I can just mark basic sonar here. So looking at my PowerPoint, you can see that one on the left there, those are walleye. A lot of times, you know, I can't tell you how many times, even I was mind boggled. One of the guys that I fished tournaments with, he was in the boat with me, and he couldn't identify a walleye on my graph. So it's really important to know what a walleye looks like on your graph. The one on the left, you know, it shows, they believe this was off of, I think this was off of Cleveland a few years ago. Shows you a suspended walleye there about 20 feet down, and then a few closer to bottom. But you know, you'll see that nice yellow arc. You'll see, obviously, the bigger the fish, the more yellow you're going to see in there. But you really need to know kind of what a walleye looks like. And the other thing too that you can do with that skimmer transducer is you can mark fish at high speeds. So this is really important on Lake Erie. When I'm going out and, you know, I put in at Vermilion, heading north, looking for some fish, I can't tell you how many times I've been cruising along 20, 30 miles an hour, and I'm looking at my graph and I start seeing fish. I shut the boat down, sure enough, they're walleye. I put lines out and it's game on. So really having the ability to graph at high speeds is important. And when you're graphing at high speeds, it's going to look a little bit different. It's not going to look like these big, nice, solid arcs. It's going to look like little lines in the water. So look for those little dots, those little lines that'll show up on your graph when you're marking at high speeds. And then I would say, you know, shut down right away and see what they are. Are they walleye? Are they white perch? What are they? The white perch or the junk fish, they're not going to have that nice arc like you see on my PowerPoint there. It's kind of just going to be a smaller arc. But once you do this a few times, you know, pay attention when you start catching fish. It's easy to do. Look at your graph. When I reel 2 or 3 fish in, look at my graph. I do this all the time, but I also get in the habit of not doing this when it's total chaos in the boat. When you're catching fish, look at your graph and see what the graph looks like, because that's what you want to look like for in the future, you know. So like these, I can tell you these pictures that I took on this, it was days where like we were catching fish and I'm like, I got to take this for one of my presentations. I got to take a picture of this screen. So, and then mistake number 3 is not changing leads and colors throughout the day. This is something that I am guilty of to this day. I can't tell you how many fishing tournaments where I've been out there on the spot where I hammered them in pre-fish, and I'll get, you know, a few fish in the boat. I'll think the day's going great, and then all of a sudden it's dead. So what I don't do is I don't change my leads. I don't change my colors. I'm running that 85 Chrome Bandit back that I caught in practice or that I caught earlier in the day. And I'm not changing my colors out. I'm not changing my leads out. Because what happens in the morning is not always what's going on in the afternoon. The sun comes out, you know, the duller colors like the whites, the blacks, the oranges, they might work really good in the morning. But once that sun comes out, those chrome colors might start working. So your blue chromes, you know, any of your antifreeze, colors like that really work good in that clean water when the sun's out, they might start firing. So just constantly changing leads up. A lot of times will get in a bad habit of, if I'm catching fish in an area, I will just leave that area. That's a bad thing to do. If I'm still marking fish, fish them. Just change your leads up. Maybe add some snap weights. There was a recent National Walleye Tour Championship on Lake Erie last year. The guy that won that tournament, that's how he was so effective. And you know, in the morning fish were up high. In the afternoon, those fish dropped to bottom. He snap weighted them, and he ended up winning that tournament, $100,000. So I know you move fast. We have a short time, but are there any other questions over there, Luke, that you're getting?
Yeah.
A couple of them are as far as shuffling boards go. Do you ever shuffle boards where, let's say you want to change up your outside board number 3, but you're happy with board number 1 and 2? Do you ever free spool board 1 and 2 and then bring board number 3 up in front of them? So there's some questions on shuffling boards.
Yeah, so that's something you can do. You got to watch. it's kind of dependent on how many people you have in the boat. I will do that from time to time. Mostly, I would say I probably go to the front of the boat and do that method more when I'm running spinners up higher in the water column. With those crankbaits pulling, especially if I'm running snap weights, I'm not really able to do that. And if I'm running snap weights, a lot of times too, you know, it'll hit bottom and I'll be picking up, if I'm fishing structure, I'll be picking up debris.
Yeah, and if I could add to that as well, it really, you know, shuffling boards and changing boards is incredibly dependent upon the presentations you have out there.
Exactly.
For the most part, crankbaits will float when they're not put under tension. So when that bill's not working and diving, most crankbaits will either be a neutral buoyancy or they'll float. And if you're running snap weights, as soon as you start like letting a board free spool back, that weight and that bait is going to go straight to the bottom. So if you're trying to bring something up in front of it, you can cause a lot of problems when you start trying to do too much with different presentations. You can cause a lot of problems that way. Another question real quick that I tried to do an answer for one of our viewers that I'll just touch on again. Someone mentioned when they do add snap weights into their presentation, sometimes that board will run funny or look weird.
Yeah.
And they want to know if they're doing something incorrect. And you're not doing anything incorrect whatsoever. As Zach can elaborate here, snap weights will definitely change the dynamic of how that board runs in the water.
Yeah, it's going to come out of line. I talked about having that nice presentation when I'm using my Cisco rod holders and I got the 4 boards in line. When you got a snap weight on, your board is going to be out of line. It's probably going to be tipped up. You know, if I'm running a reef runner, Luke,
Oh, yeah.
a reef runner with the 2-ounce snap weight, it's going to almost look like there's a fish on it. It's pulling the board back. So no, you're not doing anything wrong. I would advise, if you're able to, offshore planer boards is the way to go, because when I'm pulling a snap weight on an offshore board, it's not going to dive underneath the water. Some of the other boards that you're going to get on the market, if I put a snap weight on there and I'm in any type of rough waves or anything, it's gonna like torpedo and dive under the water, and I'm gonna have a hard time getting it up, especially if a fish takes it under or anything like that. So
Yeah, that's really important to not allow these boards to dive.
Right.
Especially with I'm not sponsored by offshore. I'm not sponsored by Church. I've run both boards, and I have found if you do find diving boards is a problem, when I've made the switch to offshore, I had a ton of success with those boards, keeping them up above the water. I think they're definitely a leader in the market when it comes to not having those boards dive. That's really a bad deal, especially when fighting big fish. When that board dives, you have no control over that fish anymore at all. You're literally just fighting the board at that point. Another question, Zach, was if we could cycle back to your graph and maybe find some marks on there that are non-walleye, that look like non-walleye to you?
yeah, so looking at that first graph on the left-hand side, I see some marks there on the bottom that are just kind of like little blobs. Those are definitely not walleye. Those could be perch. Those could be little baby catfish, rough fish. Those are not walleye. I would say that one in the middle, every single fish you see there is probably a walleye. The one on the right, that's a stack screen. It's hard to say, but I know those ones that are, you know, like 30 feet down in that high one, those would be the ones that I'd be targeting, because those are active fish that are up in the water column. They look like, you know, probably 2 to 4 pound fish. The most important thing I can say, just like I talked about it, is when you start catching some fish, look at that screen and look and see what it looks like. That's the best way that you're going to get to reading your graph. And also too, guys, I'm giving a seminar at Cabela's next weekend on just how to pick out the right graph and stuff, but it's really important to have your transducer in the right spot and proper transducer placement. That's what's going to give you a nice readout on your screen. It's really going to help you be able to read what a walleye looks like.
Another question real quick, Zach, and then I'll let you get on the roll again here. Could you recommend some colors for a sunny day versus a cloudy day?
Yeah, so on a sunny day, I'm definitely going to have some chromes out. One of my favorite colors is blue chrome. Another one is a custom color from Walleye Lure called, or Warrior Lures, called Gin and Tonic. It's been lights out the past 2 years. When it's a cloudy day, I like to go with my black colors, like a Halloween color, and sometimes, a whites, colors like that. I don't get too hung up on colors. I'm a big custom guy. Like, I have a million different color crankbaits, but the biggest thing is what the sun's doing and what the water clarity is. When we have dirty water, especially on that west end of the lake, I like to use those real bright colors, especially in the spring. Right now, the problem with the lake is in some spots, the lake is actually too clear, and we don't like clear water in the spring on Lake Erie.
No, definitely no.
With temps below 50.
Yeah, clear water's cold water, and cold water is usually bare water.
Right, right.
We got a bunch of questions piling in now, and they're all great questions. What are some of the trolling speeds you target?
Trolling speed's all dependent on time of year and what presentation I'm running. In the spring, I like to start off slower. So if I'm pulling crankbaits on the west end of the lake, like I'm going to go out today, I'd probably start on the low end, like 1.3, 1.2, 1.4, and around there. Just enough to, cover some ground, get that crankbait moving. I will say if I start catching fish at 1.3, I'll crank that speed up and see if I can cover more ground to be more efficient. The faster I go, the more ground I cover and find those active fish, the more efficient I can be. So if I'm catching fish at 1.3 out there today, I wouldn't be afraid to creep it up to 1.7, 1.8, and still see if I can continue to catch fish.
Speeds can be really goofy. Just to add that real quick, I helped a mutual friend of ours, Ryan Buddy, break a boat in one day, and it was late March, and we were breaking his kicker motor in, and you couldn't be at one speed, especially the trolling speeds that we like to be.
Yeah.
And we popped a 31-inch, 10-pound monster doing like 3.5 miles an hour when the water temperature was 38. So we definitely like to be on the slower end, and I think that is better for picking up big fish, but definitely experiment with speed. I mean, we can tell you speeds all day long, but at the end of the day, really let the walleye tell you what speed you want to do.
Spinners too, we would go a little slower with spinners.
For sure.
And then too, a good tip is, and I know you do this too when you're fishing, is making a lot of S turns.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you make S turns, what happens is one side of the boat is going to speed up, the other side of the boat is going to slow down. And if there's a walleye following that crankbait and they see that variation in speed, a lot of times that's all it takes to trigger a bite. Mark, same way, you can attest to that. How many times we've been out there and 3 on one side when it's the fast side. So definitely play around with that. Sometimes you'll see me out on the water making S turns. So
guys, just on the live feed too, I'm doing my best to keep up the questions, and if I miss it, I apologize. Mark or myself will try to pick up on some of this stuff. A lot of great questions come in, so please keep them coming. Jim has a really good question here. When a board dives, any preferred method you use to get the board back up out of the water?
So I will typically slow the speed of my boat down. If this is a good fish and I want to get it in the boat, I will slow the boat down. And it's important to have good quality line because this is when your line's going to break. Just keep nice tension on that, and just don't try to do one of these. Don't try to horse it. Just nice slow tension. Eventually that board will come up. It does happen from time to time. Again, that's why I use the OR18 snapper clips, and it's just really important to have nice slow reel and tension on that board the whole time.
Yeah, I know. Obviously the situation can change if we're fighting a big fish. I would not hesitate even one bit to put the boat in neutral and just fight the fish and try to negate all that pressure the board's putting on it. Something I do as well, just to add on that, Zach, if I have a board dive on me, I will sometimes, if it's a small fish that I don't really care if I lose or not, or if I'm just trying to change something up and a board dives, I will typically, I'll point the tip of my rod right at the board and give it line and allow the buoyancy of that board to pop it back up out of the water. That's a good way of if you're just trying to get it in real quick and you're not fighting a big fish.
Awesome. We have about 5 minutes left here, so just going to wrap up with a couple more questions.
Yeah, let's see if we have any more here. When I go to the opposite corner and point 45 degrees, I always seem to get tangled. What am I doing wrong? I'm assuming, Mike, you're referring to retrieving boards. That's what we'll go with at least.
Yeah, so probably it's probably not a big enough fish to really pull that board back. When I use this method, most of the time it's a 5 pound plus, 4 to 5 pound, fish. This method is not a method that I use all the time. It's just one of the ways you can bring the board in. And it's also dependent on, am I using a snap weight? Am I 150 back? What's my lead on that rod? That all has a lot to do with it. And also too, it's the type of board you're using. With the offshore boards, I'm used to where they're gonna be in line. Another thing to keep in mind is, am I making a turn? If I'm making a turn and it's just a slight turn and my boards are a little bit faster and I have a fish on, 90% of the time, if I try to do that method on my outside turn, I'm going to tangle with those other rods. So I can just tell you the for sure thing is that board shuffle method, where I bring those rods in, have that extra rod holder on the opposite side of the boat to where I can put the inside board on that rod and it's still fishing.
Couple more questions coming in here, Zach. A couple of them we'll try to touch on real quick. Someone had thoughts on rattle crankbaits in dirty water. I would say for the most part, especially really any time of the year, any kind of sound you can put out there is typically a good thing.
I run bandits probably 75% of the time.
Those are one of the loudest baits out there.
Those are loud baits, yep.
Tracy's new to trolling and wants to know
Awesome.
what weight and type of line you use.
I use 12-pound Gamma, moss green. It kind of matches the color of the lake. There's a lot of different lines out there. Maxima's a good line.
That's what I'm a Maxima.
Yep.
I was 12-pound last year, and I always like to tinker, so I'm going to 10-pound this year just to get a little bit smaller diameter.
You want to make sure it's matching whatever diameter they're using in the precision trolling
Right.
app. Mark's going to touch on that in his seminar.
Jim wants to know how to tune a lure. That's we can definitely go on a
Tuning
rabbit
a
hole on
lure,
that
yeah.
one.
Offshore makes a product called the Easy Tuner, Easy Crankbait Tuner. That's one way you can do it. The other way, I'm old school. I just use the old pair of pliers. Mark likes his Reef Runner tuner right here. But if I have a Reef Runner is known for being out of tune, and it's running to the right. So I put my lure in the water, and what I will do is, if it's running to the right, or the right of the boat, I will take the eye of the lure. Lucas is going to grab one for me here. Thank you, bud. Mm-hmm. So if my lure is running to the right of the boat, what I will do is I will take my tuner and I will tweak the eye right here in the opposite direction that it's running. This can be daunting at times, but you play around little. You don't want to do it a lot. You don't want to really overdo it, but just tweak it a little bit. Put it back in the water, see where you're at.
The important thing too on this, guys,
Thanks, Mark.
there's a ton of current on Lake Erie, and there's times where you have a perfectly tuned crankbait, and it looks like it's blowing out to the side when really that's just some current pushing it.
Right.
For the most part, if your lure is diving and it's not trying to roll up on itself or really kick out, for the most part, that's in tune. Like the biggest thing is not to over crank those, because you can damage that eyelet and all of a sudden, a $12 custom bait becomes a worthless piece of plastic.
And I'll be honest with you guys, the great thing about a Bandit is you don't have to tune it. That's one of the reasons why I'm 75% of the time I'm running Bandits. They're a great bait.
Our last question here. When we refer to line too, guys, we're all talking about mono right now. Mark will get into braid. We're mostly strictly mono guys. Do you ever run different weights on the same side with the deepest first and the least weight on the outside board?
So with snap weights, I think you're referring to snap weights.
Correct.
Yeah, I'll like to run my my heavier snap weights on the inside, and then my lighter snap weights on the outside. If I run my heavy snap weight on my outside board, it's really going to pull that board back. So keep that in mind. That's a great tip. Run those heavier ones to the inside. It also makes it easier when you're retrieving the board too. One
thing just to touch on real quick that Zach talked about, the method of shuffling boards. I do the similar method to Zach as well, bringing boards in close to the boat. And the one thing that you need to be okay with is tangles are still going to happen.
Yep.
I get tangled, Zach gets tangled, I'm sure Mark gets tangled. But when you bring your boards close to the boat, yeah. When you bring your boards closer to the boat like that as well, and you do get a tangle, especially with snap weights, instead of having 150 feet of line out there, Now you've got a tangle that maybe is only eating up 20 or 30 feet as opposed to a bunch of lines. So
yep. And just the biggest thing we can say is just keep it simple. Start off, if you're just new to this, run 2 on each side, run 3 on each side. Don't try to run too many rods, and don't try to do these fancy methods to bring it in. Just keep it simple. If the board shuffle works for you, do it that way. You know, if the method I showed you where you go to the opposite side of the boat, if that's working for you, do that. But try to keep it simple.
Absolutely. All right, I think that wraps up our
fantastic.
questions.
So we're gonna have a break here. We're gonna run a Ross Robertson video.
Yeah.
Great. We'll run a video for you guys to watch from Ross Robertson, and then we'll break into Marc's seminar. Thank you.
So why South Shore Marine is a great question. These guys, they run a really, really tight business. They're on top of their game. They're on top of service, support, sales, very responsive, very supportive, very knowledgeable about Grady's. I can't say enough about Tom and his entire crew. The service department's been very, very good to work with, and those things are really, really important. It's not just the sail and driving away in a boat, it's the support you get afterwards that really makes the difference. And you can't put a price on that. It's very invaluable. So it's January 21st. We're in Huron sea trialing a 307 Grady. And fortunately the weather has been kind to us. It's about 40 degrees or so in the middle of January, which is pretty unusual. We wanted to take this boat out and just put it through some of its paces on the lake. And Mike was kind enough to arrange a sea trial for us today. So my Grady history to date is I started off with a 257 center console. And that was a little bit small, but I enjoyed the center console. And then I went to a 271 Canyon, which is a little bit bigger and a little bigger engines and everything, but it still had the center console. And what I really wanted to do was identify a boat that had both fishing capabilities as well as something to socialize on with friends. And I went to a walkthrough 275, which is what I currently have right now, which I'm very happy with. It gives the best of both worlds. If you want to entertain, like go to the Cleveland Air Show or whatnot, it's very convenient for that. It's got nice amenities. They're all Grady's are very feature rich. We're looking at the 307 today just as an upgrade from the 275. The support seen from the guys directly at the factory of Grady White, they do listen to inputs. I've gotten phone calls from their guys regarding thoughts on the boat, features, functions, those types of things, and they listen. And they've actually made a couple changes to the boats that I've purchased that have addressed some of the features that I wanted to see on it. So you don't always find that in a manufacturer. It's a tough thing to do, but those guys, those guys will take that stuff into consideration. So, hats off to the guys at Grady White.
I'm frequently asked, what is a fish hawk? And simply put, a fish hawk is a speed and temp probe that, while temperature is pretty obvious, the speed thing allows us to adjust for underwater currents. Believe it or not, what your speed over ground on your GPS is and what your lures are doing are often two different things. And understanding that is really the way to unlock how to catch more fish. What actually a fish hawk does is this speed wheel is going to be placed down close to where our lures are at. So we're actually going to get a true speed over ground, not at our GPS, but where our lures are running. Because set and drift or the currents are going to change, so our lures are not actually running at what we think they are as we turn left, right, go into waves, go with waves, underground obstructions, etc. So something as simple as the fish hawk here, which runs completely on batteries, totally wireless, is going to help us catch more fish. So there's a few components to make this Fish Hawk X2 totally portable. One we're going to use is simply a steel leader. You can use multiple things, but this is good and durable, and that's going to allow my sinker, and you can use many different things. Something like a 1 or a 2 pound weight is all you really require. This torpedo weight allows a little bit more cutting of the current and waves. Something like this we're going to get away, and then we're going to use a high quality or at least a heavy duty, so you don't have any componentry dropping the expensive probe in the water, snap and swivel. Then we're going to take that to a rod and reel. This is actually a fish hawk rod and reel. You don't have to have this, but it's pretty convenient and nice. And we're going to use heavy braid, like this is 50 pound braid on a line counter rod and reel. The Fishhawk module is actually water activated, so there's no switches to turn on or off. Place that in a rod holder. Like I said, I use an old line counter reel with heavy braid, approximately 50-pound test, maybe a little bit more, and lower the probe down. I don't like putting it at the exact level that I'm fishing, but close to it so we have an idea of exactly what our lures are facing. The Fishhawk X2 LCD screen also operates on battery, so you can take it from boat to boat, put it in the compartment like I do when not in use, and I like to mount mine on a little slide track here in my birch track so I can take it in and out very easily and move it around in the boat. Instead of a large corded transducer like the larger and more original X4, all we're going to do is simply place this on our line, as this is our receiver. Place the receiver on the line and just simply, it's kind of like Chinese straws, turn the top and that will slide right to the bottom. The transducer just needs to be in the water. You don't have to have it down by the probe or even halfway down. At the Fishhawk probe, we were at 1.1 miles an hour. Our speed over ground is actually 1.2 to 1.6 as we're surging, but it's steady at about 1.3, 1.4. So that set and drift as the currents are here, it's about 2 to 3 tenths. And that can make a big difference if we're going too fast or going too slow. This is especially important when you're on flat open water and you go and you're catching fish going one direction, but when you turn around and you come back and you're not catching fish, because those underwater currents that we can't see are pushing our lures a lot faster or dragging them down a lot slower than what we realize. Knowing what your lure is actually doing down there, believe it or not, 4, 5, 6, 7 tenths of a mile an hour can be the difference from the set and drift or the way that the currents are changing from your lure to your speed over ground and your GPS. And that makes all the difference between the diving depth, if you're using weights, if you're using floating lines, or if that lure is even working at all. Something like this is going to make it absolutely no questions asked, 100% guaranteed to know what your lures are doing. With an effective speed of 0.8 miles an hour to pretty much as fast as you control, the X2 is going to let us know what our lures are doing.
Welcome to South Shore Marine. My name's Will Kruger, joined here on the beautiful 355 Pursuit at South Shore Marine by my good friend Shane Simon, one of our delivery captains here at South Shore Marine. A very affable, fun guy to be around with an infectious laugh. Shane, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So Shane's probably one of those guys here at South Shore Marine, we have a few of them, that probably have more miles backing down trailers at the boat ramp with a big rig than a lot of people put on their cars driving forwards.
Probably.
So we, at South Shore Marine, we have a pretty special experience for people who are buying boats that are either new boat owners or existing boat owners that are trading up or moving around in the different models of boats. As a delivery captain, Shane, what would you say is probably one of the more important things while you're going through the process of getting people their boats?
So one of the biggest things that we do a little differently at South Shore is when we go into a delivery day, we are prepared to spend a large amount of time with the customer until they are satisfied, happy, comfortable, not just with the boat itself, but with running the boat, navigating the boat, docking the boat. Sometimes along that process, we will actually, go through a day, and if there is an instance where we need to take more time, we will make more time for them. So I would say on our end, we're looking to make the customer experience the best that it can be. It should be a very happy day. You're getting your new boat, and you're about to spend a wonderful summer on it. So
yeah, and so to that point, sometimes as a new boater, you get a little overwhelmed and maybe it's time to hit the pause button, right? There's an information overload sort of thing where trying to take in all that new information from where the battery switches are, how to plug in a latitude, longitude in your new GPS, and so I think the important part there is that we want the boat buying experience to be positive. We
Yes.
want people to be really comfortable and safe. We want people to be safe on the water.
absolutely. The information overload is definitely a real thing when it comes to, especially a new boat buyer purchasing a boat. there's a lot more to it than getting in and going. It's not like buying a car where you literally get in, turn the key, drive off the lot. There's a lot of different systems that are involved with boats, anywhere from, you know, simple wash downs to air conditioners to very extensive navigation, you know, radar, GPS, autopilot. There's a lot more to it than just getting in and going. So we try to really dig into the bowels of the beast and, you know, show you where all the electrical, show you where all the seacocks are, pumps, fuel, fuel shutoffs, waste systems, so on and so forth. So it can get overwhelming for people, especially if you're moving up into a bigger boat with more systems. So yeah, we try to, you know, do our best, you know, the first day, and if we have to, we always circle back, and obviously we're always here for further questions down the road.
Both of us share the same passion for boating. This is a lot of fun, and you know, when people get into these boats and go out and have a good time over the summer, it's always exciting for me as a consumer of boating too, to be out and about with my family doing the thing that I love most in the summertime, and to see our folks that have gone through the South Shore boat buying process enjoying their boats too.
Absolutely.
At the end of the delivery, 9 times out of 10, I'm sharing my cell phone number with these people because we're pretty like-minded at the end of the day.
Absolutely. That is probably one of the best parts of the job, is the simple fact that, you know, you could be fishing, sitting on an island, or even sitting in a marina, and you get to see them and see that they're having fun, and
it's a cool part of our job. Well, we love having Shane on board here. I love working alongside of him. Truly an expert in his field, just a great guy to know. When you go through the delivery process and get to meet this guy, trust me, you'll be getting the phone number exchange. We'll be going through that. Thanks for joining me, Shane. I really appreciate this.
Absolutely.
And SouthShoreMarine.com is the website. Please feel free to jump on and check us out. And let's go boating together.
I'm ready.
We're here at the Quick Bytes seminar. Next up, we have Marc Bottone of My Bonnie Charters. Really excited about this next presentation. He's going to give you an inside depth of how he sets his boat up and also how he runs his presentations on his boat. So we're going to hop over to Marc in the 216 Grady White. Sit back and enjoy.
Hey, good morning. We are live here at South Shore Marine. I'm Captain Marc Bottone. I'm the owner and operator of My Bonnie Fishing Charters. I run out of Lorraine Harbor for walleye, and then I run out of Alcott Harbor for salmon and steelhead. Today I'm going to be discussing a very common technique utilized by the charter fleet on Lake Erie to pursue walleye, and it's the Mast and Ski Technique. And it's basically very similar to what Zak just showed, planer boards, taking baits way out to the side of the boat, allowing me to run multiple rods on one side of a boat and take baits down to the fish that I'm pursuing on that date. The Mast and Ski Technique has its differences though. You are going to be fishing with a much larger planer board than the tournament guys will be running. And you're going to be sending this out to the side of the boat anywhere from 150 to 200 feet. This is going to give you a much wider footprint in the water. It's going to get your baits. It's going to get your baits away from the shadow of the boat, and it's going to allow you to run a lot more rods. So to get started doing this, you need to ask yourself, is this a technique you want to utilize? If you're a tournament guy and you're only running 6 rods, you may not want to do this. You may want to pursue the inline board avenue. But if you're going to be fishing with 4 or 5 people and the state of Ohio says, hey, you can run 3 rods an angler, this definitely is something you're going to want to look into. It's a very effective technique when you're trolling at the higher speeds that you would typically run in May, June, and July. It is definitely not the technique you want to utilize in April when the water temperature is very cold and you need to get down to 1 or 1.3 miles an hour. The boards depend on speed to get them out to the side of the boat. So if you're trolling slow, you're running worm presentations at like 0.8 or 1 mile an hour, you're probably going to want to look more towards the inline planer board techniques. So to get started doing this, you need to spend some money. And one of the first purchases you're going to have to make is you're going to need a mast. Cisco is a company here in Cleveland. They make beautiful machined aluminum products. As Zach had touched on earlier, they make rod holders. They also make planer board masts. And a planer board mast typically gets mounted to the front of a boat. It's going to have the reels necessary to bring the boards in and let the boards out. It's going to have a pulley or a contact point, and your line's going to run through this and then run out to the side of the boat. Now, there's a lot of choices when it comes to reels. You can go with an electric version, which is what I run on my 28 Carolina Classic. The electric's fantastic. If I've got a bunch of stuff going on in the boat and I want to bring my boards in while I'm putting rods away, I reach up under my gunnels, I hit the electric switch, I push that switch forward. I know that my reels are going to be bringing in my planer boards. If you want to keep it a little simpler, you can go with just a manual reel. Which just has a clutch drag and a handle. Now, most boats come with a framework for the hardtop. On my 28 Carolina, I have a rather large aluminum tube coming off the hardtop. I've got my planer board reel mounted to that tube. And then up front, I would have a pulley similar to this. And that pulley would allow the line to be farther forward and allow the line to run out to the side of the boat. If you go with a system like this and you utilize the framework of your boat, it eliminates the need for drilling holes to mount a mast. I don't know about you, but this is a beautiful boat. The less holes I drill in this boat, the better. So the boat comes technically with a mast system already built into it. Just utilize the parts that you can get from Cisco to make your own mast system out of your hardtop. So boards can be purchased at AmishOutfitters.com. The board we sell is made of Zak. It's a synthetic material. It has a very similar density in the water to cedar. Cedar is what we used to run for boards. It's just a lot harder to get a hold of these days. So when this board is sitting in the water, it's only going to ride maybe 2 inches above the water. And they come in a port and a starboard, and it's pretty easy to see. So this would be a port side board. The water is going to push up against this, and it's going to take it out to the side of the boat. We also sell a flag at Amish Outfitters. You insert that flag right in the board, and this gives your fellow anglers an idea where your boards are at in the water. Another part to this system is a shock cord or snubber, board snubber. This would go to your main line, the line that runs out to the side of the boat, and then this would clip to your board. So as you're going through the waves or you're in some choppy water, this snubber absorbs a lot of shock. These boards pull extremely hard. And by placing the snubber on the board, it prevents that tow line from snapping in the waves, and it'll keep your lines from false releasing. It'll also keep the tow line from snapping if you hit a really big wave. So you're going to need planer board line, and we sell at AmishOutfitters.com planer board line. Our board line comes in 300 and 500 foot spools. 300 seems to be the most popular, and it comes in 500 and 800 pound test. It's basically the same material that you would purchase in braided line. It's a Dyneema material. It has no stretch. It's great in the sun. It doesn't rot. It handles moisture real well, and it's extremely strong. Typically, I'll put 300 feet on a spool, and this allows me to, throughout the season, trim off any damaged ends. About every other trip, I'll inspect this line. I'll look for frays. I'll make sure the knots are all secure. The next piece of equipment you're going to need to run boards successfully is a clip. You need some way to get that line on the tow line, your fishing line on the tow line. This is a typical pinch pad style release. We call it the Pilgrim release. You can go to Amish Outfitters and pick them up there. We sell them by the dozen. This is called a clipper release. And a clipper release utilizes a rubber band. We typically run these with Braid and Crankbaits. We also carry rubber bands, which are necessary if you're going to run Braid. We sell these at Amish Outfitters. And it sounds simple. It's just a rubber band, and you think this is something you're just going to go to any Office Max store to purchase. But these bands are like silicone. Typical rubber bands, if you leave them out in the sun starts to deteriorate them, and that leads to a lot of false releases. So with the clipper release, you would stretch that band, you slip it inside those two little nipples there. Am I allowed to say that? That's what they are. And that's how the band will fit inside that release. When a fish strikes, it pulls loose. And then I'm going to show you real quick how to put this on the tow line. Each release has a little slit right there. These clipper releases, you reach over here, clip it on, and send it down. All right, the next item you're going to need to purchase is going to be rods and reels. Like I said, we're going to spend some money. When you run inline boards, you run a little bit stiffer rod and reel. Typically for us, running the big Mast and Ski style boards, we run a lot softer rod and reel. I'm running a 7-foot medium light rod. And that's the one benefit to running the Mast and Ski style system is Mr. Walleye tends not to be the most aggressive fighter. So when I hook a fish on this system, the tow line will come, the rod line will come loose from the tow line, and it's just you and the fish. There's no plastic, you're not bringing in a planer board. Everything's just you and the fish. One of the main presentations that we run off this is Crankbaits. It's a fantastic presentation, and we typically run them off monofilament. So when I purchase reels, I fill them up with monofilament, and I try to run something with the same diameter as 10-pound XT. I've had really good success the last couple of years running this Blood Run. It's rated at 16-pound test, but it has a very similar diameter to 10-pound XT. And the reason I do that is probably the most important thing as a troller you can have is on your phone, and it is going to be the Precision Trolling app. And this app is really important for figuring out the depth of lures. You just basically can punch in whatever bait you want, and with this app you can figure out how much line you need to let out to achieve that depth. So when you're spooling up your monofilament reels, you want to utilize a line that it has a very similar diameter to 10-pound XT. And I believe that is 0.014 thousandths of an inch. I wrote that down this morning. Correct, 0.014 thousandths of an inch. So if you decide you want to run a heavier monofilament, like a 16-pound with a thicker diameter, your baits are actually going to run a little bit higher than they would according to the app, and vice versa. If you run a thinner diameter line, that bait's going to dive a little bit deeper. But this is like really important. You're going to need to purchase reels. When you buy reels and you buy rods, I don't know if you can notice, all the rods and reels are matching. This is so we can repeat every fish that we caught. You want to send out the same lead, you want to send out that bait to the same depth, and you develop a program throughout the day. You need repeatability, and by purchasing all matching equipment, repeatability becomes really easy. All my reels have line counters on them. They're the exact same make, exact same model. Same with rods and reels. When you purchase rods and reels, same make, same model. With running monofilament, I'm going to go back to the releases 1 second. When you attach mono to the tether for your planer board, I found it best to run just the clipper or just the Pilgrim release. With these releases, you can clip it right to the mono. It holds nice and secure. You don't need any rubber bands. Now, if you're running braid, you definitely want to run a rubber band. So on my boat, I've got 16 rocket launchers up on the hardtop. I'll have 8 rods spooled up in mono. Again, that's for my crankbait presentations. I will also have 8 rods, all matching, with 8 matching reels. And I'll have those filled with braid. And the braided line that is most utilized by the charter captains on Lake Erie is the 8-pound diameter, 30-pound test. Either Power Pro, some guys like Spider Wire, but that is typically the line that we utilize to run diving planers. And when I say diving planers, I'm referring to Jet Divers, True Trips, Trip Z's. They're all basically the same thing. They're a device that will take your lure down to the fish based on how many feet of line you let out. Again, you can go to the Precision Trolling app, and there will be there'll be a chart that'll give you the exact depth that this bait is running based upon how many feet of line you let out. So on my jet rods, again, I utilize a relatively soft action rod. This makes the fish feel pretty big, but it also gives me a little bit of cushion. So when you're running braid, braid has 0 stretch, and you know, sometimes customers will get back on them rods and they think they're tuna fishing and they're like horkin fishing and just really ripping them through the water. Well, if you got a rod with enough bend to it, it kind of absorbs some of that shock. So when rigging a rod for a setup like this, basically I'm going to put a small bead on the line, then I'm going to put a barrel swivel. That barrel swivel is going to attach to the front part of the diver, and then on the back end I'm going to have a leader, and that leader typically will have just a plain snap. That plain snap goes in the eye like that, clip it shut, and then typically I will run a 7 to 8 foot leader off the back of that diver. On the business end, I'll have a quality ball bearing swivel if I'm running spoons. And I'm kind of letting you in on a little secret. Any of you guys fishing the little Michigan Stinger spoons, I'm going to let you in on a little tip. That hook is a game changer. Most of your spoons come with a teeny tiny little treble hook on them. And that little treble hook will pull out of a fish pretty easy. You put this meat hook in their mouth and it's almost foolproof. It's a Matatsu 1/0 hook, and I'm sure my buddy Kurt Hotchkiss is going to have a fit for letting out his secret, but it works extremely well.
Hey Mark, we have some questions coming in, so
Yes.
I was just going to hop up there and go through some of them. So the first one is, what kind of tow line are you using?
I'm running, on my boat, I'm pulling 800-pound Amish Outfitter tow line. There's a lot of other tow lines on the market. A lot of them are like a cotton blend. They tend to rot. This will pull just about anything. You can almost tow a boat with this. It's really, really strong stuff. It's 800 pound. I'll put 300 feet of this on a spool, and I do it on my port and starboard side. We also sell a 500 pound, a little bit less test. It's just preference.
Great. Next question coming in is, do you ever tune your big boards?
Yes, great question. With the manufacturing of these boards, again, we make these out of AZAC. It's just a polymer board. So sometimes you get some inconsistencies. If you notice here, I've got 3 holes. This would be right from the factory. This would be right from Amish Outfitters. I put a hole here and I put a hole here about 1.5 inches forward, 1.5 inches back. And when I get a new set of boards, I'll put that board in the water and I will move this eye bolt either forward or backwards to get the best pull possible out of this board. And it's just something you can't do until you put it in the water. It's a way of tuning the board and dialing it in perfect. I've even modified my boards. I put, when you buy a board from Amish Outfitters, it's made to collapse. You can do the wing nut on the top. That's the way they'll come. Pull this bar up and you can flatten this board. That's how it comes from Amish Outfitters. Myself, my boards fit right on the gunnels of my boat, and when I'm running down the lake, they lay perfectly in the gunnel. I modified mine by putting little rubber door stoppers, and then when I set that board down on my gunnels, that rubber is on the gel coat, and I don't have any metal scratching my gel coat. I also took some 5200 and just covered all the nuts and bolts so that these aren't scratching my gel coat while the board's resting on the gunnels.
The next question kind of goes along with that, is how, when your big board's like jumping in bigger waves, how do you prevent that?
We run the snubber, but I'll be honest with you, at some point, you have to make a decision. Do you want, typically when I set my boat up in the morning, I'm going with the waves. So boards jumping the waves really doesn't become a huge issue for me. Now, eventually I need to turn back around and run into the waves. If the waves are so big that I'm having a hard time keeping my boards running right, I'll pull gear and I'll run back upwind and come back down with the waves at my stern.
It kind of seems like, too, how I talked about how I like my offshore boards, having the right board is key.
Yeah, having the right board is key. Another thing is you just have to know the limitations of the equipment. You know, if it gets extremely rough out, even though, like, I know my boat, I'll handle rough weather, there is a point where I say, you know what, I know my baits aren't running right, the boards aren't running right, it's time to pull gear, run back up through my icons, and come back down and make another slide through the area I just caught fish.
Awesome, good stuff. Next one, last one here before we get going is how do you handle small fish when you have a small fish and it's not tripping that clip?
Oh, we're going to get to that. I'm going to cover that. Once I present all the equipment we're going to fish with, once I spend all your money, then I'm going to kind of get into the meat and potatoes, like how my day goes, like how I start setting gear. But for the most part, I can manually trip every rod here. In fact, I frequently, when I put a board out, I put a board line on that tether line, I set my release so that even if I get a 3 or 4 pounder, I don't want it to trip the release. I want to manually go over there and release that fish. And I'm going to touch base on that in a second. So back to jet divers or diving planers. There's a lot of them on the market. One of the local favorites is a To Trip diver. There's a 30 size and a 40 size. Keep this in mind. That doesn't mean that that's going to dive to 40 feet. That doesn't mean that that's going to dive to 30 feet. Both of these have their own dive curve. So there's a dive curve out there that shows if you let out 100 feet, this is going to take your bait down to whatever depth that dive curve is. The only real difference is the size. So like this is a 40 jet. They also make a 20 jet, they make a 10 jet, they make a 50 jet. The 50 is bigger than this, the 30 is smaller, and the 10 is even smaller. You can basically get all of these down to 20 feet just by varying the length of line that goes out. A great feature with the To Trip is they have a release on them. So if you trip this off the tow line and you want to get it in a hurry, you don't want to have to let it swing, you can snap this. This will stop the resistance of the water against the face of the diving planer, and this will start to come up to the surface. It's a great feature. It's really great if you're fishing in real skinny water and you're afraid of snagging bottom. If you hook, if you want to change a bait real fast, or you hook a real small fish and you don't want this to dive into the bottom, you just give this a good tug. It'll snap that arm forward, and this will level out and start to come up to the surface. You can do the same thing if you have fish on. Usually if you get a fairly good sized walleye on, they'll trip this themselves. The jet diver is different. It does not have an armature at all. There's no way to trip this. What will frequently happen with these is you'll get a small fish on it, it'll flip it over, and you'll see this come up to the surface. You definitely know that you need to check that rod. You're gonna see this dragging up on the surface. It probably has an undersized walleye, a white bass, whatever. Personal preference is why we choose either a jet diver or To Trip. I fish out of a harbor. The captains I deal with, most of them still run jet divers. We've been running these forever. So I run a jet diver because I know when I call Frank, hey Frank, what's your leads? I'm a hunter back with a 4D jet. Okay, now if you're swapping information with one of your captain buddies out there, you have to clarify, is it a jet diver or a To Trip? Because the jet diver, the 40 jet diver and the 40 To Trip they look identical, but they have very different dive curves. So that's real important. If your buddy says, hey, I'm running To Trips, I'm running them back 80, chances are good you're gonna need to run this back 100 or 120 to achieve the same depth. The Lure Jensen jet diver does not dive as deep as the To Trip. The To Trip has a much steeper dive curve. So it's definitely something you need to keep in mind.
Hey Mark, just a few questions real quick.
Yes.
If you could just mention the hook, that hook again that you talked about on the spoon.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of people asking about that.
So I'll let you zoom in on it real quick. It's a Matatsu, very tough to pronounce. I think it's Barbarian, but it has a sickle. And it's a 1/0 size. And I'm telling you, I was really pleased with them last year. A captain friend of mine from Erie, PA told me about it. I had to swap a couple little tiny treble hooks out and put this on, and I was very pleased with the performance of them. You don't lose a lot of fish, especially on the swing. It seems like once, and I'll discuss the swing here in a minute, but once they get this hook in their mouth, it typically holds very well. So, and they're easy to sharpen. And they come really sharp, but you can hit them with a file. You only have one hook to sharpen versus 3 on a treble hook. But it's much more holding power than that little tiny treble hook. All right.
And then Mark, another question that just
Yes.
came in was talking about Braid and relating to the Precision Trolling app. I know as far as like mono versus Braid.
So 8-pound diameter, 30-pound braid is thinner than 10-pound Trilene XT. And I'm going to touch on that here in a minute. So I'm sure some of you are like, well, I can't afford 16 big board rods. You know, you got 8 mono rods and you've got 8 braid rods. I really can't afford that. Well, that's completely understandable. I need speed and efficiency, and if I want to switch from crankbaits to jets and spoons, I don't want to have to retie 8 rods. I want to be able to pull that whole side of the boat, put them up in the rocket launcher, and I want to put my jet divers with braid out to replace those rods, and I don't want to have to retie 8 rods. But there typically is a season. Early in the year, we're typically running crankbaits. As the water gets warmer, spoons really come into play. You control a spoon anywhere from 2 miles an hour to 3 miles an hour. Spoons are almost, like, there's not much you can do wrong with this. There's no tuning involved, and the spoon is very speed tolerant. These little spoons have caught walleye for me, like I said, anywhere from 2 miles an hour to 3 miles an hour. There's times in June when the water's in the 70s, I'm running 2.8 to 3.0. I mean, it's wonderful. I can cover a ton of water, I can cover it fast, and I can cycle rods extremely fast. So if you don't fish spoons, it's something you should look into. It's a great technique for putting numbers in the boat. Probably not something that a tournament guy is going to look into, but I mean, my goal's, 5 people with smiles and a full cooler of fish. This works. And what's fantastic, I can let the customers unhook fish, or if you got buddies that want to unhook a fish and you only have one hook to worry about. When you start digging around in a fish's mouth with bandits, you got a good chance of somebody getting hooked. So something to keep in mind. Now, we're going to talk about how to wrap a jet rod, and this is something I'm going to refer to as securing gear. If you're that guy running down the lake and you've got a jet diver just spinning around in every direction, you're probably not doing it right. Like your stuff should not be swinging around up in the rocket launchers when you're doing 30 miles an hour down the lake. Because what's going to happen is this is going to spin around everything, and the back of your boat's going to look like Cub Scouts got in there and tried to earn a merit badge for not tying. It's a disaster. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to secure your rods at the end of the day. And we call it, take your reel, turn it upside down, and you're going to take your leader and you're going to turn it towards the front of the reel. And you're just going to let that line continue to come off the reel. And then you're going to take a Amish Outfitter lure wrap. You're going to wrap it around just like that. And that's going to keep your bait secure when you're going down the lake. And then in the morning, when you get to your spot, that comes off. That's ready. Throw it in the water, put your jet in the water, and you're ready to fish. Probably one of the most important things I can think of for keeping all your equipment secure in the rocket launchers and not having to spend 45 minutes re-rigging everything when you get to your fishing spot. Is there's a sinker and there's numbers on that sinker. So you can adjust this to run either port or starboard, and you can set it to a 1, a 2, or a 3 setting. A 1, a 2, and a 3 setting. So the back, typically the length of rod, anywhere from 8 to 12 feet, all dependent upon water clarity and what application you're running off it. When you get a bite, the water's pushing against here, it's deep, diving deep. When you get a bite, that pops open, this will plane up to the surface, and you reel the fish in. All right, so here we are, we're fishing. We're gonna get fishing here. Setting board rods. You gotta always envision that everything works from the number 1 rod over the top to the center. Everything works from the center of the boat. So the first rod in the morning you're gonna set with your number 1 jet rod. You're gonna send that down the middle of the boat. You're gonna get it out to the whatever depth that you have determined you wanna fish. Once that comes to the distance you want it, you're gonna reach over. You're gonna grab the tip of this rod, pull line off. You're gonna clip a release on, reach over here to your tether, pull the tow line to you, put the clip on, clip it to the rod. And you're gonna send that down the tow line. And then you're gonna move to your second rod. Your second rod's gonna be located in front of your first rod. You're gonna send that out, clip it to the tow line, and send it down. Your third rod, same thing. So as you can see here on the tether, we have 3 rods. They're all running the exact same distance. And the reason we do that is to avoid tangles. So if I found I wanna run 100 feet down to fish that I'm seeing at roughly 20 feet, I'm gonna run 100 feet on this whole side of the boat. The reason being is, number 1, to avoid tangles, but number 2, if you look, this is real important, if you look, this tow line comes down at an angle. And even though it sounds like I'm running 100, 100, 100, and everything's at the same level, it truly isn't. The rod closest to the boat is running higher than the rod closest to the water or farthest from the boat. Throughout the morning, what I'm doing is watching what rods are getting bit the most. If my inside rods are going and my outside rod is not going, I know that I need to bring my presentation up a little bit. So instead of 100, maybe bring it up to 80 or 60. It's called reading the releases. I'm figuring out a program, even though I'm running the whole side of the boat the same distance, and all those lures technically should be running the same depth, they're not. And that's where the inline board guys, if you're swapping information with a guy with inline boards, if he tells you 100, chances are good you're going to need to run a little bit higher if you're running big boards. Your baits aren't entering the water at the same depth that theirs are. If you can zoom down, you see there's a bunch of releases on that outside rod. Throughout the morning, if you see that, if you see a bunch of releases loaded up on your tow line, that's an indicator. You need to pull that rod out of the water. You need to check it. There's probably a white bass or an undersized walleye, or the bait's fouled. It's something you really need to check. And while we're at it, we're going to show real quick. Zach, we got a bite on that outside board rod. Look at that. So that line came loose. We're going to walk right here to the middle of the boat, and we are going to wait for that line to clear all the other rods on the inside of it. You may have to count for a little while, but make sure you wait till the line is directly behind the back of the boat. I like to say, you ain't got a thing if you ain't got that swing. If you bring it in too soon, you're going to bring all those lines that are on the inside of this rod with it. So we'll go ahead and reel you in.
Cheap head. Darn
It
it.
figures. It's a reef runner. So we get this fish in the boat, we hand this rod off to somebody else and say, hey, send that back out to 100. That's what caught that fish. This bait should be going out. And while that's going, this rod will now take that other rod's place. And if you can move that bait to the other holder, and this rod will cycle down and take that other rod's place. So now, what was 2, that's probably good enough there. What was 2 is now your number 1 rod, and what was 3 is now your number 2 rod, and then this rod would just fall right into this position right here. Zach, I'm going to show one more time how to set rods. 3 minutes. So that bait, you send it right out the back. There we go. Come up, grab that rod tip. Now, you don't have to lay the rod on the floor or anything like that. Just grab the rod tip, grab the line. Come over here. Keep your releases in a handy position right there by the rods you're setting. Put your release on the line, and then grab your tether. There you go, and that falls right into place down the tow line. I like to try to keep about 20 feet between all my applications. All right, and that's how you set planer board lines. Real quick, we're going to hit Dipsy Divers. I just want to show. You can see how your number 1 setting is much closer to the boat, but is diving deeper. Your number 2 setting is farther from the number 1, but is like kind of in the middle. And then your number 3 setting is even farther away from the boat, but is riding even higher. And then a real quick lesson on how to trip dipsies. I tend to set my dipsies tight enough that the fish do not trip them. I want to manually trip them so I can kind of control some of the chaos. Zach, if you can give me a nibble on this. Typically when you're watching for bites, I watch the line. You might have to unclip that. I watch the line, and a lot of times your bites, you'll see the line raise in the water column. You'll typically see that line ride higher before you see the rod even buck or move at all. So as soon as you see that, don't trip it yet. Bring it over here to the middle of the boat and just give it a little tug. Go ahead and hold on. That's it. Just like an inch, 2 inches at the most. Just kind of give it a little pull. What you don't want to do is you know, the Bassmaster Classic hook set, you're going to tear the hooks right out of it.
And you got to find that sweet spot on the Dipsy to adjust the tension on it too. That's important.
Absolutely. Good. All right.
Awesome.
Any questions on that?
So we have a couple questions coming in. What color Dipsies do you like to use?
Any neutral color. I like black and I like gray. I like tan. I do not like any metallic colors. I don't want any reflection.
I would second that. The next question is, how do you attach the rubber band to the line?
Oh. When you're running braid, you want to half hitch that rubber band right around just like that. It's just a half hitch, and I'll do it again. So if you're going to only run 8 rods and you just want to go with all braid rods, you're going to set those rods up, load them up with braid, make sure they're calibrated, and then what I do is I add a 20-foot leader of 10-pound diameter monofilament, not fluorocarbon, but monofilament. I like that extra stretch. If you're going to run big boards with the braid, you're going to make sure that you put a rubber band on. That rubber band will come out of the release nice and smooth, and that braid will not cut into the rubber pads of the pinch pad releases. But that's how I, before I started running 16 rods, when I only had 8, I ran a monofilament braid hybrid. I would just, during crankbait season, I would have the monofilament leader on, and when it was jet time, I'd cut the leader off, put the jet divers on, and run jets.
And we have time for one more question. What are the Dipsy rod holders? Why are the Dipsy rod holders parallel to the surface of the water there?
That gives it that way you're getting the closest to the actual dive curve. It looks like these are going to fly right out of the boat. They won't. There's enough resistance that, I mean, I'm trying to move this. There's enough resistance there. When that rod's bent, that rod's not coming out of there. So if you're running Dipsy Divers, don't be that guy that's, you know, the rods are straight up in the air. I mean, I don't know, my neighbor was catching fish with the Dipsy Divers on backwards last year. So that just is a testament like how good our fishing is. But like your Dipsy Divers should not be straight up and down like this. You're not getting the true dive curve. You're probably a lot higher than what you think you're getting. The closer the tip is to the water, the more accurate that precision trolling app is going to be.
There's a lot of questions coming in too, Mark, about the bags on the side of the boat.
Oh, trolling bags. So speed is everything. You need to have speed control when you're walleye fishing. At Amish Outfitters, we sell what we call our beefy bag. It is a trolling bag. It's not a drift stock. It's super heavy duty. It's double stitched webbing. The pair I have here are probably 12 years old. You need to put a line on the front and a line on the back. This is really important. This bag, you want it to ride just below the water line along the side of the boat. You're going to attach it with a rope to the midship cleat. That midship cleat rope, you're going to use the rope and kind of twist it around the cleat to kind of bring this bag to where it needs to be. And then the same with this back rope. Now this back rope is going to keep this bag from swinging under the boat. If you run an inboard boat like myself, this is really, really important. Don't put this bag in the water without a stern cleat attachment. It'll swing under, it'll end up in your screws, and you're going to end up dead in the water. So it's real important to have this. You're also going to use this to pull that bag out of the water. You'll never pull it from the front. There's just too much water resistance. Grab the back of the bag, pull it straight up. All that water pours out of the bag, and it's just super easy to pull. If you're running a single motor boat, you're going to want to have matching bags. Put one on the port, one on the starboard. That's going to keep your boat going in a straight line. If you're running a boat with twins, like my boat's got twins, I put one on the motor side, the side that the motor's running. That prevents the boat from doing that little arch. So if I have my starboard motor in gear, that boat's going to want to push to the port. I throw a bag in the water, it alleviates that. It helps my autopilot remain in a straight line, and it brings me to trolling speed. Any other questions?
Great, thanks, Mark. There's some questions coming in. If we don't get to them, we'll try to go back through the live feed and answer them as they come in. Apologize for that. Really good information, Mark. Really enjoyed that. I learned actually quite a few tidbits on that, so really enjoyed that. Just want to remind you guys, our raffle is going really, really well. There's some awesome prizes on there, and actually a lot of the products that Mark just talked about from Amish Outfitters are available on that raffle. So check that out. It's the same thing with Offshore Tackle. They have a lot of products on there that you have a chance to win. So check it out and have a chance to win some cool prizes. We're going to cut to a break, and then next up we have Lucas Hahn. Appreciate the information again, Mark. Great job.
So this is Tom Mack from South Shore Marine. So what to expect when you visit South Shore Marine would be the question. So for starters, we're in Huron, Ohio with very easy access right off of Route 2. You can see our building on the south side of the highway at the Rye Beach Road exit. When you enter South Shore, you're going to feel a very upscale, modernized feeling throughout the whole facility, from the parking to the very warm and inviting customer entrance. There's a customer lounge between our sales and service offices when you enter the building. The showroom itself, we made a big investment. The showroom area was all constructed between 2015 and 2017, so it's a very modernized facility. And we felt that it should be, you know, when you're looking at the premium products or some of our certified trades, we want you in the nicest, well-lit, clean environment. We've got epoxy floors. We've got the boats positioned very easily to view the boats with safe ladders for boarding, so you can really get a good look at the boats. They're powered up, plugged in, lights on, and it's just a beautiful facility. We try and make it look like a boat show all year round, and when you come here, you're going to see something very different. So it's bright, light, airy, lots of room, especially now in this COVID world. Lots of airspace is a good thing. So very comfortable environment. We welcome you to come see us here at South Shore Marine, and welcome to the showroom.
Thanks, Tom. It really is a beautiful space in there for the customers to come in and take a peek at some of the new models from our brands, as well as connect with a salesperson or hang out and enjoy a cocktail and pretend you're out in the water. So situated right off of the showroom is Building 5, which was built in 2015. It's about 18,000 square feet, one of our indoor heated storage rooms. We house some of our late model brands that were recently delivered in this building. And so our customers can come in and obviously get on their boat and pretend that they're out on the water again. Or also, we sometimes use it as access for some of our customers to come through and take a peek at a model that they might be interested in looking at for their own purchase. We have some brand new boats in here as well along the wall, and is also just kind of an extension of our showroom here. Moving down on the ground here in Building 5, one of the latest additions to the building is our brand new tiki bar of sorts here that we were pretty excited about. We put it together last week in preparation for the 2021 boat show, and just a great place to hang out off the showroom. Bar stools, teak table, a couple of screens. We'll put the game on here and have a good time here in Building 5 as well. If you think of a name for this thing, let us know, because we're still trying to come up with something fun and exciting for the name of this place. Welcome to Building 4, one of our biggest indoor heated buildings we've got here at South Shore Marine. Built in 2007, it's roughly 20,000 square feet, and we've got about 60 boats in here. It's a tight fit, and our space management is very accurate at South Shore Marine, so no more than a couple inches between each boat, just to make sure that we've got ample space here for all the customers' boats that want indoor heated storage. Welcome to Building 3 at South Shore Marine, where we store most of our 30-foot range boats, roughly 32 boats in this building, and roughly about 18,000 square feet combined between this shop space as well as the main shop space adjacent, which we'll go into next. Our winter workload at South Shore is typically pretty high, so having a lot of indoor heated storage is key for us to be able to maintain all of our customers' boats. Behind me, we've got buffing going on, we've got some general mechanical going on, we've also got some general maintenance going on with some caulking in this building. So a ton of activity happening here at South Shore Marine, and our indoor heated storage facilities are just fabulous for being able to get all that winter workload done here at South Shore Marine as part of the premium care package. Situated just off the main storage part of Building 3 is the main shop here at South Shore Marine. This is an area where we stage boats that have come in from haulers before we pull the shrink wrap off. It's also one of the final staging areas for washing and detailing before going into the showroom. It's also one more spot that our mechanics and rigging folks can get in here and do some final prep work. Just a lot of things happen here in the main shop of Building 3. Welcome to the Fiberglass shop at South Shore Marine. Housed in Building 2, it's one of our multi-use buildings where we've got mechanics working up front as well as our parts department. And then in this building we do a majority of our bottom coatings as well as some fiberglass repair. We've got Gary working on this boat, this 336 Grady White, doing some rigging. We've got a restoration project going on behind me with a 28-foot Marinette. A ton of things happening here in Building 2. Just in general, a changeover building. We also house some boats in here throughout the winter for additional storage in the heated storage program. Welcome to the parts counter at South Shore Marine, probably one of the busiest places here at the shop. We've got the gang here working really hard on inventory management for projects that we have going on internally, as well as customers coming in off the street ordering parts over the counter for their boats. We're authorized suppliers and vendors for everything from stereo parts in the boats to stern drives and outboard engines as well as inboard engines. Pretty much everything you can think of for your boat can be ordered here through South Shore Marine, and we do on a daily basis. Situated right off the parts department is the mechanic shop. Our mechanics in South Shore Marine are probably some of the most qualified, certified mechanics really in the state of Ohio. Our mechanics have multiple certifications from Mercruiser, Mercury, Yamaha, as well as Volvo, and truthfully, in the Yamaha world, we are really some of the most educated in that we've got 2 of probably less than 10 Yamaha MasterTech mechanics in the entire state of Ohio. Nationwide, it's only in the hundreds. So truthfully, our gang here at South Shore Marine in the mechanical world is really at the top of their game, which really, to the customer's point, means that we're going to take care of your boat in such a way that everything is maintained to the manufacturer's specifications. The guys here and gals here are just experts in their field. We're really proud to be certified in those different brands and to be able to take care of these boats and these engines in the way that they really should be to give you long-lasting performance and reliability that you need and that you want for your boat in the summertime. Welcome to Building 1 at South Shore Marine, one of the original buildings here on campus. We do some indoor heated storage in the corner, also some carryover maintenance from the fiberglass shop and the mechanic shop. All of our trailer maintenance takes place in Building 1, as well as some of our bright work and varnish work going on here in Building 1.
Spoons, they catch a heck of a lot of fish, but I'll tell you, the thing is choosing the right size. And we get caught up in color, I'm the same way, but paying attention to what size will drastically increase or decrease your catch. And this is a Silver Streak Junior, and this is kind of the all-around Great Lakes killer. It's that perfect size, about the same size as a little Emerald Shine or something like that. But you're gonna catch a lot more fish on this size, but sometimes you have to know when to get larger. Maybe you're catching too small fish, you're getting a lot of junk fish, things like that. Stepping up to a mini and even a salmon-sized spoon to get the little fish off, the junk fish, things like that. And then don't forget to go back down when those fish stop biting. Size matters.
Hi, this is Tom Mack from South Shore Marine. Welcome aboard the Grady White 255 Freedom. So this is a great example of Grady White's engineering and the innovation you see in their dual console series. They build dual consoles from 19 to 37 feet, and it's just a great example of why the boat works so well for so many people on the Great Lakes. It's a great fishable boat, but it's also a wonderful family boat with good seating throughout. So we like to set this boat up with the Command Elite captain's chair. It's a bolster style captain's chair with armrest that's really comfortable. Gives the captain lots of sight lines, good lines looking forward. You can also stand at the helm and have plenty of room. So while we're peeking over here, the dual consoles give you a very comfortable head compartment for obviously using the facilities, but also somewhere to simply change. You've got a nice 4 and a half double lounge seat. The rear part is electric, and articulates out. We've got a real easy to use aft seat. So you pick up a lot of nice seating here. You've got rod holders aft, as well as either a fish box or a live well right in the transom. Also a nice walk-through door. We're showing as an example some Cisco triple rod holders that would be very common to see on this boat for our Great Lakes fisherman who wants to do the walleye or salmon trolling. It just makes a great setup, especially with those twin 150s. You can get down to salmon or walleye speed real easily. Really nice, secure hard top. This one's got the pretty underside color and the painted frame. There's mesh storage underneath, keeping your safety gear all in one place, but also well ventilated. As you boat, you've got great seating forward. You can also fish the bow of the boat if you like. There's an optional casting platform and sun pad that goes in here as well. But really nice rail work, cup holders. We can do a windlass or no windlass on the 25. But she's a really versatile boat. Takes the water great with that CV2 hull. So come see us. Let us show you the Grady White Freedom Series. Understand why people love dual consoles on Lake Erie. It makes a great family boat, but it's also ready to go for the serious fisherman.
Welcome to South Shore Marine.
All right, guys, welcome back to our third and final segment here of our Quick Bites fishing seminar. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I also want to say a huge thank you to some of the people that have helped put this on. Will Kruger, Troy Martin, and Mike Mannion have all done an incredible job getting this seminar into your guys' homes, so a huge thank you to them. I'm going to introduce myself again. My name is Lucas Hahn. I'm a tournament angler here on Lake Erie. I actually want to touch a bit how I got my start. I'm relatively new to the walleye game. I've grown up on Lake Erie and would hop on friends' boats. My grandpa had a boat and would go walleye fishing a couple times a year, and really got into it in 2015. I actually attended this seminar. It was in person then, obviously, but attended this seminar in the spring of 2015, purchased my first boat from South Shore Marine, and really went headfirst into the walleye fishing world. The first tournament I fished was a Grady White Boat Owners Club tournament in 2015. If you can see the PowerPoint there, there's a picture of myself and Mike Pasadine, who maybe some of you know here as a salesman at South Shore. The first tournament we did together for the Grady White Boat Owners Club, we finished second in, and we didn't want to stop there. So 2016 we came back and we won it that year. After that, I really got hooked on tournament fishing. I did a tournament a little bit later that year in June out of Cleveland with a longtime tournament partner of mine, Jason Fisher, on his Ranger 620. And at that point, I was totally hooked. Literally the next day, I came here to South Shore and bought my Ranger 621 that I still fish to this day, and really just went all out. Starting in 2017, I started to fish the local LEWT circuit here, as well as master walleye circuits, and a couple other local tournaments as well, and have learned a ton along the way that I hope to share with you guys. Really a shift in mindset and the way I break down a week pre-fishing for tournaments, and how I try to locate those tournament grade, trophy grade walleye. So a couple of the keys that I can't stress enough when you're looking for tournament grade fish is you need to think big first, then small second. And the biggest thing I focus on is patterns. Patterns being the kind of bite that I'm going to be on. I look to see time of year, the water and lake conditions, and the where and the why. And those are the three things that I focus on most. You do not want to obsess over lure colors, lead lengths, packs of boats, things you see on Facebook. That's all good information to garner. Social media is great as far as maybe getting a heads up on a bite. If you see a pack of boats and you're not sure where to go, maybe that's a spot you can go check out. But when you're really trying to target those tournament grade fish, you need to figure out what kind of bite you want to get on and why you're on that kind of bite. And that's when things really start to come together for you to be able to consistently put big fish in the boat, is really understanding the particular pattern that you're on. A couple of my favorite patterns for big fish, and a lot of these coincide with tournament times of the year. First thing, which we're getting into right now, the springtime bite. It's a mud flat outside the reef complex. I think most of us are aware that Lake Erie is definitely a migratory lake, in that fish start off in the Western Basin, and a large mass of them spawn up in the reefs, in the Maumee River, in the Sandusky River, and the Detroit River, and they make their way further to the east. Not all of them, but a big chunk of them make their way further to the east in the summer months, later in spring, summer, and fall months, and they return back in the springtime to do the spawn. So the first pattern we're going to talk about is the mudflat bite outside the reef complex, where we're targeting staging pre-spawn females. It's in the springtime. Usually, I would say the peak of that is late March, last couple weeks of March through the middle of April. It's a pre and post spawn bite. So when I say pre and post spawn bite, if I had it my way, at least, I would try to catch 5 pre-spawn females all the time. That's where they're going to be at their max weight with all their eggs, and that's where you're going to find your best weights. But it can also be a post-spawn bite as well. The thing to understand about that is fish will feed before and after they spawn, especially when they come off the reefs, and that post-spawn bite can be a great spot to find a reef to work, and then you work the edges of the reef, not necessarily on the drop off, but maybe a quarter mile or so off that reef complex, and you troll that mud flat looking for suspended post-spawn fish coming off the reef from spawning, looking for a meal after they've spawned. And like I said before, these are typically suspended fish as well. A lot of the water depths we fish out in the mud flats out west tend to be in the ballpark of 20 to 28 feet deep, sometimes a little bit deeper, sometimes a little bit shallower, but roughly in that 20 to 28 foot range. And you're going to have your best success on big fish there looking for suspended fish. You will mark fish on the bottom that time of year. I've never had much luck with fish on bottom in a trolling situation. Maybe if you're going out to try some ice jigging, as we call it, or just try to simulate what we do ice fishing, jigging fish on bottom, you can have some success that way. But the best success you're going to have is going to be trolling for those suspended fish. Keep your baits somewhere between 8 and 15, 16 feet deep. Will put you right in that target. Some of my favorite baits I like using that time of year are bandits, which I know Zach talked about a little bit about earlier. Deep husky jerks, the number 12 size is a good bait, and perfect 10s also. With the DHJs and the perfect 10s, they give you a little bit different presentation than a bandit. A bandit is a floating bait, so if you stop or make a turn during this, the bandit will tend to rise a little bit, which can be a trigger for fish. DHJs tend to be a neutrally buoyant bait, so they'll just kind of like sit in the water and stay where they're at. And P10s, we usually wait that time of the year. We'll do a 20-20, 30-30, 40-40 snap weight program, usually using 1, sometimes 2 ounce weights that year, that time of the year, and that'll actually cause that bait to sink a little bit. So sometimes you really want to pay attention to little minor details like that. When you're doing S-turns like Zach talked about earlier, or when you're changing speeds, even stalling one side of the boat out entirely that time of the year. Just make a hard turn, stall that side of the boat out, let the boards just sit in the water for a second, and when you go to make your turn or make the turn to come out of that, that can definitely trigger strikes at times. So paying attention to the different kinds of baits and what they can offer you can help out with success that time of the year. The next pattern we're going to talk about is fishing river mouth areas. That can be a spring or a fall time bite, and the reason I say the fall time bite is most of us are fishing the fall brawl anymore on Lake Erie. The best pattern I've found in the fall is getting into an area around a river mouth. River mouths hold a ton of bait, and where you find bait, you typically find walleye as well. I like the river mouth areas in this area. In the fall, what comes to mind, like Cleveland, the Cuyahoga River comes to mind. Lorain is a great river mouth to fish in the spring and the fall as well. Typically, fish have made their way to Lorain in the springtime, whether it be late April, early May. You can usually get on a bigger bite around that Lorain Harbor area. And just, again, the fish can be anywhere in the column that time of year. I think I tend to have a little better success still on the suspended fish, not quite fish on bottom yet. Some of the crankbaits I like that time of year as well. Bandits, which bandits are really in any time of the year bait. DHJ 12s, perfect 10s. I also like running reef runners as well that time of the year. Reef runners definitely have a little more of an erratic action, and that bait tends to pick up its effectiveness come later in April into May, and then throughout the rest of the summer months. Another pattern I like to fish is shallow structure, and that is really good in late spring, early summer. One of the reasons I think the shallow structure bite is really good is there's a lot of spawning bait fish up in the shallows, and those big walleyes will go preying on this spawning bait fish. Forage perch, white perch, sheephead, white perch. Typically the fish in that situation are on or near the bottom. And when I say shallow structure, typically fishing waters 16 foot or less, 17 foot or less. I've gotten all the way into 9 foot of water at times and had success on big fish. And some of the baits that really shine in that particular pattern are flicker minnows, bandits again, and reef runners. I'll also throw in some flicker shads, some smaller profile baits. I know probably most of you have heard at some point or another match the hatch, in which you want your presentation to match the bait fish that's available at that time. Some of those smaller baits, like the flicker shads, number 9 flicker minnows, do a really nice job of matching the forage base for walleye that time of year. And the last pattern I'm going to talk about is deep structure, which is my favorite pattern to fish for big walleye. That's usually a late spring, early summer pattern again. And I find a lot of these fish are eating perch and white perch, and they can be very big perch and white perch at times too. We've pulled 8, 9, 10-inch perch out of walleyes' bellies before, big walleye bellies, and that's definitely their forage in there. Typically the fish are on bottom in that kind of pattern as well. And when I say on bottom, they are sucked tight to the bottom. I usually run reef runners and bandits that time of the year, primarily reef runners with snap weights, and those get dragged through the mud. And when I say drag through the mud, it literally means drag the bait through the mud. I start to pay a little less attention to the precision trolling app at that time, and I know I'm deep enough when I'm letting my bait out. I'll put my bait out roughly about 20 feet or so, put a snap weight on it, and then I will just send that down till I feel it go slack to where I know that weight is on bottom. I'll usually hold it, this is almost like bottom bouncer fishing. Hold my bail, let that line tighten up again, let the speed pick that snap weight up again, and then I free spool it again and let that weight hit bottom again, so I know I'm as close to bottom as I can. I typically like to snag some baits from time to time when I'm fishing a deep structure pattern like this, letting me know that my bait is down in the rocks and the mud where it needs to be. One thing that you do need to be careful when you're employing a technique like this is to check your line frequently, because when your line gets drugged through rocks and zebra mussels and sand, it can really put some stress to that line. And even though you might have 12-pound, 14-pound, 16-pound line, that's definitely not the case once it begins to be abraded. So checking your line often when doing this kind of pattern is pretty important. So once you've figured out what kind of pattern you want to fish, and employ your plan for the day. We're going to go do mud flat fishing off the reef complex, or we're going to go fish shallow water structure between Huron and Vermilion, or we're going to go fish deep water structure outside of Lorraine. You need to learn to interpret your sonar correctly to know that you're actually fishing over live water. Take good mental notes on days that you have success and try to burn some of those images into the back of your mind, because that's the stuff that you're going to want to look for to replicate success in the future. And the time of the year will definitely change what you see. The pattern you're trying to fish is going to change what you see. If you take a look at the screen right now, I've got 2 screenshots up there. The one on the left, that was taken off of the Marblehead Lighthouse, which is just outside the Sandusky Bay. And a lot of the squiggly looking lines you see in there, some of the smaller ones, there's a huge white bass run that goes up the Sandusky Bay that time of year. And you can see a few big yellow hooks in there. Those tend to be the walleyes that are in there feeding on white perch. That was a pretty good day right there. The water was a little bit muddy, but the fish were there. The particular tournament we were pre-fishing for that year was actually won right off of that spot, and you can see how there's big walleyes hanging out in some of that smaller bait. The screen you see on the right side, a couple of real big hooks in there. That was taken outside of Cleveland during a fall brawl a couple of years ago, and you can see how there's some big suspended yellow hooks in there that have a lot of color in them. The way sonar works, to maybe help understand what we're seeing, sonar works through sound, obviously. Sound traverses through water really, really well. But once it hits a pocket of air, it does not traverse that, and that sound gets bounced back to your transducer. When you look for big, thick hooks like that that have a big return, that typically indicates that that fish, whatever it is, has a really big swim bladder. Big walleyes have big swim bladders. So when you're looking for big, bright yellow returns, that would typically indicate a larger sized fish. The only way to know if it's a walleye or not is you have to get some baits down there where you're seeing them and try to catch those fish. But I would say if you start seeing hooks like we see in the screen right there, big, thick yellow centers, you definitely want to drag some baits through those fish.
Hey Luke, just some questions coming in here.
Yeah.
So the first one is, as far as how we find a mud flat.
Okay.
What are we looking for?
Yeah, so a mud flat is I use it as a pretty, it's a loose term. That's just a big, featureless expanse of water that's just a basin. There's not necessarily any structure associated with it. There might be some gentle depth changes that occur over it, but it's really just a basin, just an area of mud. And the reason we're targeting that outside of the reef complex, a big thing for me, I love to fish structure, fish hang around structure. And from a tournament standpoint, if I go out on a day where, let's say we go out 2 days before a tournament and we happen to stumble upon a pot of big fish and we hammer them that day. When you're fishing just a mud flat or an expanse like that, there's nothing holding those fish there other than some bait. Now, the reason we fish the mud flats outside the reef that time of year is because that mud flat is associated with a piece of structure that fish are staging for. So when you look for the mud flats, you're really just looking for the areas outside of the reefs. And that can be anywhere along the lake too. I talked about mud flats along the reef complex. And when we think of the reef complex, we often think of the cans, all the firing cans around Camp Perry. There's a ton of other reefs and shoals and areas that fish spawn on that once you understand the pattern, or once you become familiar with the pattern of we're fishing for pre-spawn or post-spawn females on mud flats surrounding the reefs, you don't have to go to G-Can, you don't have to go to D-Can, you don't have to go to B-Can. You can go explore some other areas and try to have some success there.
Yeah, and to add to that too, when we're looking at the mud flats on our electronics, typically the mud will show up brighter yellow, and then if we're on a rock pile, it'll be darker on the screen.
Yeah, so that's something to pay attention to as well. You look for transitions. Like a rock, obviously rock is harder than mud, so mud's gonna have more of that yellow to red hue to it, and when you get over like a real hard bottom, it's gonna be the strongest return. Whatever color setting that your fish finder is set up for, it's gonna be the brightest return on your graph. So a mud flat is usually gonna be a little bit more of a reddish to yellowish, kind of almost what you see, the PowerPoint I have up right now. The screen on the left, to me, looks like a mud bottom. It's a little more, you know, reddish and yellowish. I would say maybe don't take that as set in stone. Like, don't drive around just looking for a mud flat to fish. You want to go to an area in the springtime. You want to go to the mud flat, or you want to go to the area outside that reef, because the fish are there for a reason, and that's the important part.
Yeah, so somebody else asked about some examples of deep structure in the Central Basin, and I can venture to say, I guess, what you're going to say.
Yeah, probably my favorite spot to fish on the lake is Avon Point. I mean, Avon Point and the southwest corner of the Lorraine Dump are my two favorite spots. Avon Point is definitely my favorite. I'm going to get into that a little bit here on some techniques and some of the mindset you have to have when you go into a structure spot. Mud flat fishing and structure fishing are two entirely different things. When you're just fishing a basin or over just a featureless piece of water, you can go left, right, go 3 miles that way, go 2 miles that way, and you're really just looking for a pot of fish to work. When I'm structure fishing or fishing on a piece of structure like Avon Point or the southwest side of the Lorraine, you know, or some of the shallow water between Huron and Vermilion, or Vermilion and Lorraine, I'm fishing an area that is holding fish. Like, there's rocks there, there's areas maybe of where it goes from, like, you know, mud to rock. I'm trying to key in on those specific areas. I know I expanded on the question there, but there's a reason we're fishing those areas, and you really need to pay attention to that particular to those things.
All good stuff. So another question that we have is, like, if you're dragging your lures, you talked about dragging them in the mud.
Yeah.
There was somebody that asked, don't the lures get mucked up, or don't you catch debris?
So they definitely do. They definitely do, and you just need to be active when you're fishing that style. It's not something where you can just put your stuff out there, sit back and relax. It's definitely much more of an active scenario when you're fishing like that. I wouldn't say pull them out of the water every 5, 10, 15 minutes, but if you've had a rod that's been sitting there for 30, 40 minutes and nothing's happened to it, it might be a good idea to change a color. It might be a good idea to change a bait, and it's a good idea just to check the bait to make sure it's not dragging anything. A recent tournament, pre-fishing and the tournament day itself, I caught a landing net. I caught a Dipsy that had a whole bunch of worm harnesses wrapped around it. I caught a couple custom bandits that were full of zebra mussels. I caught a dead catfish. So yeah, your lures will get mucked up. It's just important to change them, because the reason your lures are down there, you're targeting big fish in that type of environment. That's where your lures need to be. It's not necessarily easy fishing, so you just need to be active and check them often.
Great, good questions.
All right, so let's keep on rolling. This expands a little bit on what I just touched on as far as using your GPS if you're fishing a structure spot, and how to use your GPS to its fullest potential, so you're making sure you're being as efficient as possible on big fish opportunities. Had a great tip a few years ago, and I can't remember who I got it from, but color code your waypoints. So when you catch a fish and you drop a waypoint, begin to color code those. If it's a small fish, have a color for it. I use green, so if it's a small fish, the waypoint's typically green. If it's a medium-sized fish, maybe in that 5 to 6 pound range, I'm gonna probably color code that as yellow. And if it's a big tournament grade fish, 8 pounds or better, that's going to be a red waypoint. So if you are fishing a mud flat or you're fishing just a basin fish, that can really help your efficiency in that type of scenario where you're really just fishing a school of fish that's just pelagic. They're just out floating around, swimming around, eating bait that's there. So beginning to develop a pattern of where you are getting your bigger bites can definitely help you be more efficient when you're just fishing an open expanse. When you are fishing structure or contours, you want to be definitely as efficient as you can in keeping your boat in that area, because you're in that area for a very, very specific reason. If you get off into a flat, or if you get off into a basin outside of your structure, you're not really fishing the pattern that you were looking to target that day. One thing that I use is Lowrance. I fish Lowrance products. They have a feature called Genesis Live, which allows me to make custom contour maps. On the PowerPoint here, if we want to zoom in on that for a second, that's a map that I made. I believe that's off of Vermilion somewhere, but it gets extremely, extremely detailed. The reason this is important, one, it allows you to be efficient, but as you start creating your custom map like this and you notice maybe waypoints starting to pile up on a particular hump or a particular piece of structure you see there, if you've got a good idea, or if you've been fishing that area for a while and you've got a couple features in that area of structure that are similar to what you just pulled that fish off of, you can start exploring some of those other features in the area you're fishing to maximize your efficiency when targeting those big fish. This is a really good way of really I know I keep saying maximize efficiency, and really that's what it comes down to when you're fishing structure like this, is you have to have your boat on top of that area of structure and pinpoint those areas that tend to be holding the bigger fish. Confidence and patience. So this is something that's tough to do right now because Lake Erie is so full of walleye, and you hear of people catching their limit in an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours, and that's wonderful. But big fish patterns are usually not always the hottest bite. And you really need to have confidence in your presentations when you are targeting those big fish. This last June, my dad and I fished a Cabela's MWC, which we came in 10th. It was a 2-day tournament. The particular spot we were fishing wasn't much more than 5 minutes away from the launch, so we had a full 16 hours to fish. Over those 16 hours of fishing time, I think we caught 16 fish over the course of the 2 days. And people were catching their limits just inside of us, fishing a different pattern. They were getting their limits in an hour and a half. The bite was phenomenal, and we were watching boards quite a bit. But I had done my homework. I was fishing a deep structure pattern, and I had confidence in what I was doing was going to give me the best chance at big fish. So if you think about it, we were getting a bite an hour, and there were times we probably went 2 or 3 hours without a bite, but I had confidence in what my electronics were telling me. I could see fish on bottom where I thought I thought were the biggest fish that I was capable of catching that day, and you just need to be patient. And it's okay to struggle. Even the best anglers at times struggle. So set realistic expectations for yourself when you are targeting big fish. I probably more than I care to share, I definitely go out there and strike out on certain days on big fish, and that's okay because you can learn from that as well. You can definitely learn from your mistakes and your failures as much as you can your success. So set realistic expectations as you start to embark on a journey of trying to catch more big fish. And really, you need to enjoy the process of it as well. You improve through your failures and your success. So when you have a good day, try to take some notes, maybe either make good mental notes or write some stuff down, things that you think you did well that day, things that you thought were a key that day to catching those big fish. And then start to experiment with that information. See if something that you learned over here is applicable elsewhere. I know that was a big light bulb moment for me when it came to consistently putting bigger fish in the boat, is starting to see how some of the little things, little tips and tricks I was doing would work elsewhere. And that's a big thing with pattern recognition as well. The picture I had up here on the PowerPoint, it's 4 big walleye. That was in 2018. There was a really hot bite going off of Lorraine. Ton of boats there. Everyone was catching big fish. And I asked myself, well, why? What's the reason behind this? And it was just a deep contour, just a deep drop off. So I'm like, well, if they're catching fish here in Lorraine doing this, why can't I go somewhere else and try to fish that same pattern and see if I can have success there? And it's exactly what I did. Just on a whim, I went somewhere where I knew it was another a drop off, some deeper, not so much structure, just a deeper drop off, which is structure, and made one pull through there and pulled those 4 fish that you see on the screen. And that was a big light bulb moment. And that's really what shifted my focus to fishing patterns as opposed to just going where other people say. This is a big thing as well, is networking. When we do tournaments, we typically have tournament teams, and I'm sure when Zach gets back up here, he'll talk about this as well. Very, very rarely, I'm not saying it never happens because there's a lot of good anglers that can fish by themselves and figure it out, but very rarely are you able to be successful without the help of some of your teammates. Lake Erie is an enormous body of water, and it's impossible to cover it all in a day or a couple hours. And as we said before, big fish bites tend to be a little bit slower, so you have to spend a little bit of time in some of these areas to actually see what's going on. When you have a tournament team or you have a group of people that you network with and talk to frequently, you need to be honest about it. Everyone likes to say they filled their cooler, they caught a whole bunch of big fish, they did this, they did that, but it's really important to admit failures that you have and don't exaggerate the success you have, because that information is critical come tournament day. There may be a few areas that some of your teammates hit that were on a good bite, and maybe your plan A on tournament day didn't work out and you're going off of their information for something else to try. So honesty with your teams is really important to make sure you're all on the same page as far as what's actually there, so you're not chasing ghosts. Another thing you can do to help with locating big fish is be strategic within your team. If you're taking your boat out and you have 2 or 3 other friends that are going out that same day, and let's say we're gonna fish off of Cleveland, instead of fishing near one another, spread out a little bit. Maybe have someone go fish down by 72nd, which is like the east side of the Cuyahoga River. Have someone fish out by the crib or right out of the mouth of the Cuyahoga, closer to like the Brown Stadium. Maybe have someone fish in between. You're all fishing the same pattern. You're fishing a river mouth area that has big fish congregated there for bait, but spread out a little bit and be honest with one another. Say, hey, you know, I seem to be on a good bite here and there's some good fish mixed in here. And let's say all you're doing is catching chickens. You can do a couple things. You can try to maybe employ one of the tactics that they're using to get some bigger bites, or you can just move over there to where they are. Another way you can be strategic with this too. Let's say you have 2 or 3 or 4 days that you that took off of work and you're going to go fish the Fall Brawl hard for 4 days. Maybe have a couple different guys go to different spots. Have someone go to Cleveland. Have someone go to Lorraine. Have someone go to Huron, because you have some time. If someone gets on a killer bite off of Lorraine, then maybe the next day you guys can go to Lorraine and you can fine tune that. So be strategic with the way you're fishing and the way you're trying to break down the lake. And the last piece of advice I'd like to give is pay attention to the local tournament bags. I don't know if I can stress that enough. So the particular series that's really big here on Lake Erie is the Lake Erie Walleye Trail, the LAWT, which is also referred to as the Big Water Walleye Championships. That is 60 plus teams on a tournament day, And those guys, for the most part, know what they're doing. They've all done their homework. They've pre-fished 3 or 4 days ahead of time. They're pretty in tune with what's going on the lake at that time, and they're all trying to put the 5 biggest fish that they're able to in their boat. So start to follow that group. See what the bags are. See what some of the best anglers on Lake Erie are bringing back to the scales. And sometimes it might surprise you seeing a big 41, 42 pound bag. Other times you might be surprised to see maybe only 3 or 4 teams had 30 pounds, 35 pounds, and the rest of the field struggled. You can kind of start to set expectations for yourself a little bit by seeing that, that even though those guys took time off of work, even though they pre-fished hard for 3 or 4 days, even though they're doing everything they can to put themselves in a good position to catch big fish, they still struggled that day. So that kind of goes back to setting realistic expectations, where just don't be too hard on yourself with that. And that's really all I have. I want this to be interactive, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions to be had. I left a lot of stuff open-ended, just due to constraints of time. So I'd like to get some questions going if we can, and if there's some questions that you guys have from some of the previous sessions with Zach and Marc, hopefully this is a good forum right now to ask those as well. So let's say giving me a couple questions here they wrote down. Evan wanted to know how far above the fish. Typically walleye feed up, Evan. When I'm fishing bottom, so when I'm having my crankbaits, literally dragging through the mud, obviously a fish can't come out of the sand mysteriously and hit a bait above them in that situation. So I think it really depends on the kind of pattern you're fishing. If you're fishing suspended fish, typically experiment with it really. If you're marking a ton of fish at 15 feet, maybe stagger baits 15 feet, 13 feet, 11 feet. Sometimes in clear water, like especially off of Lorraine in the summertime, we get 5, 6, 7 feet of visibility easy, and fish, you'll be surprised how far fish come up to hit a bait.
I'm convinced they'll come up 10 feet, no problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially when the water's clear. I always base it on water clarity. Muddier water, I want to be closer to the fish.
Right.
Clearer water, I feel like we've got a lot of room for error. You can run them higher. And I feel like higher is always better. You typically run into those more active fish up higher.
So when Marc talked about muddy water too, a tactic that I tend to employ when I start working some muddier water as well is light filters out much more rapidly when you get into that dirty water. So on a nice day where you have some green water that's not all chocolate milk and mud, maybe you get the light penetration all the way down to the bottom. If you're fishing muddy water like we do a lot around the reef complex in the springtime, you may run out of all sunlight maybe 20 feet down the water column if it's a muddy day. So bringing those baits higher in the water column, maybe there's not as many fish up there, but the fish that are there, they're actually able to see your bait and hone in on your bait. So it just really kind of depends on the situation of the day, how far to be above the fish. But that's an experimentation thing. You really just have to try different lead lengths and just keep trying stuff till something works. Jim wanted to know about a lure attractant. I personally don't use any kind of gels or scents or things like that. I have some friends that swear by them. I'm not sure if Zach's a big ProCure guy or not. Not saying that they don't work. I'm sure they work fine. I've just never found myself to have any more or better success with or without them. Do you use them on your boat?
No, I don't use any attractant on any of my walleye baits. I feel like crankbaits and spoons are more visual and lateral line strike. There are times in dirty water where I'll cheat a little bit with a crankbait and I'll tip a hook with a little chunk of night crawler.
Yeah, for a little bit of extra scent.
I will say that I find some days that picks up my bite, but for the most part, I try to keep the worms off the boat at all costs.
Yeah. I think that's interesting too. I know when you're jigging, for some reason jigging on Lake Erie, it's like you can't get bit unless you have a shiner on a jig, and I don't know why that is. That just seems to be the way it is.
I haven't bought a minnow in 10 years.
Really?
I really am convinced it's that lead banging on the bottom. It's that they feel that.
Yeah, like the spawn. Yeah, for sure, the spawning ground.
fish.
Yeah, yeah.
And blade baits, same thing. They pick up that vibration. And that's
Yeah.
what they key in on.
I guess I was the place I was going with that was if you're just going to open water jig where you're just dropping your bait down over a school of fish, sometimes that scent when a fish can actually sit there and stare at it and look at it and inspect it a little bit, sometimes that natural scent might help out a little bit there. But when Mark was talking about stuff being visual, we have to understand these baits are just going past these fish at, you know, 1.5 miles, 2 miles an hour. And if they want to eat it, they kind of have to make a decision on it. It's not something where they can sit there and inspect it. It's more of a reaction bite. Eric wants to know, if you run through a school of fish while trolling, what is the best way to turn around and go through the school again? I will say that's the beauty of running the style of boat that I do. I can be pretty pinpoint on staying on a small area of fish. So if I'm fishing a piece of structure or a school of fish, and I know my bite window on that school is maybe from this waypoint to this waypoint, and it's only 1/4 to 1/2 mile big, it's really easy for me to, especially with the small boards, make a quick turn and get right back on them. Sometimes what I'll do as well, when you make a turn, a hard turn, the slow side of your boat, all the boards are going to lay over flat, your lines are going to go slack, and it's a great way to get tangles. So sometimes if I really want to make a hard turn, I'll reel some of those boards in on the slow side, either tight to the boat or take them out of the water altogether, and literally just rip that boat right back around and go right back uphill. Some days you can't do that as well, and that can be a little taxing. If it's a rough day and I can't go into waves probably 1/4 the size is what Mark can with his boat.
You know, with both motors right into 4-footers.
Yeah, I don't like trolling into 2-footers, to be honest with you. We lose a lot of boat control. We lose a lot of speed control when we do that. So if it's a day like that and it's a 1/2 mile stretch, you're just going to be tired at the end of the day because you're going to, you know, run a little ways uphill. You go through your thing or you go through your little slide, you pick everything up, and you run back uphill and you go do it. I mean, it can definitely be an active game at times.
And I'll say, even in a big boat like myself, I will rip and run if it's really rough. If I'm trolling in 3 to 5s, I don't want to fight going into them, and I know the bite's a short window. I'll rip all my gear, and that's one of the advantages to the electric planer board reels, is I'll hit both switches. I'll bring both boards in at the same time. Everybody gets a rod, reel them in, throw them in a rocket launcher, back up to my waypoints.
Yeah. Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes you just can't leave your stuff in the water, and
Right.
and we're gonna have Zach.
So
hop in
we're
here
getting
now,
some
too.
more questions in.
Okay.
Keep them coming, guys. Some really good questions. Next one is Mike asked about the fall brawl, and he said, if you were to win the fall brawl, where would you fish? You can go ahead and start.
I mean, I love fishing. This is my theory on it, and I'm not saying my theory is correct. Talking with Mark and Zach a little bit earlier, I think it's sometimes hard to have some of the fish out west compete with the fish out east because of their diets. Fish out east are typically eating lots of shad, lots of smelt, whatever shiners are left they're trying to eat. They're typically getting just a bait fish that doesn't have a lot of bones, a lot of fins, a lot of spikes. It's just a piece of fat for the taking. When you start seeing the fish out west, they're eating a lot of like rougher bait, where they're eating lots of forage perch, little sheephead, little white perch, and I think that allows the fish out east to pack on a little bit more weight. So one of the patterns we talked about fishing a river mouth area, you're probably going to see me camped out somewhere around the Cleveland area, fishing those areas right outside the Cuyahoga River where it's holding all that bait for big fish, because I think that's where the bigger ones tend to be that time of the year for me, at least. Lorraine can be a really, really good spot too, but I typically don't go a whole lot farther west than that.
I'm going to fish on one of their boats because usually by the time the fall brawl kicks off, I'm winterized and it's bow season, and I would much rather be hunting. So
Yeah, I don't do a lot of fall fishing either, but if I did, I'd be off Cleveland all day long.
Cleveland's a pretty good spot.
And that's one of those things that's tough too, as far as like being patient. I've got some friends that, I mean, they'll have great days. They'll catch 3 big fish, and then you ask them how was the bite. Like you see a picture of them holding up 3 big fish, and it looks awesome. It's like, yeah, we caught 6 fish all day, but they were the right bites. So sometimes, you know, having that patience is really, really important if you know you're in an area where there should be big fish and your graph is telling you there's some big fish to be had. I got one question here I want to hit real quick, Zach, before we go to some more. Mike wanted to know, why do some guys always find the big fish? Do they have a special network, or is there some other magical thing they do?
Secret handshake.
Secret handshake. I would say a lot of it is having a good team and having guys that you trust to break down the body of water that you're fishing for a tournament, and have guys hit a couple different patterns. So let's say Zach and I and Mark team up for a tournament. I may say, hey, I'm going to go fish some deep structure off of Avon. Mark, why don't you go fish some structure off Lorraine? Zach, why don't you go fish some of the shallow water structure like off of Huron and Vermilion? And I trust these guys. They're great fishermen where they're going to be efficient. They're going to, you know, hit the structure spots they need to hit. They're going to stay on the break lines and the contour lines, and they're going to have their baits have the most success to have success catching big fish. And then you just kind of break down a body of water like that. And I think that's why some guys do find big fish, because they're in a network of guys that are all great fishermen that really pay attention to some of the finer details when they're hitting these spots.
Yeah, it's all about covering water.
I use bribery.
Bribery?
I find that you get a lot with a Baconator sandwich and a case of Twisted Tea.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of info.
Evan asked about wireline fishing. I do a little bit of wireline fishing out east. I don't know about you, Luke.
I don't tend to do a lot of wireline fishing. I have had some success. When I do run wire, do you run the single strand or the 19 strand?
I run the single strand.
The single strand. I've experimented with that a little bit. It's kind of a pain in the butt to work with.
I run a ton of wire. On Lake Ontario, I will have typically 6 board rods with heavy steel, and then a shoot rod with heavy steel. So I'll have 7 wire rods in the water on any given day. I am absolutely amazed with that torpedo wire heavy steel. I had it, I ran out of time, I wanted to show people how to use it. It is absolutely the most user-friendly wire I've ever worked with. For years we ran copper on Lake Ontario. Typically you got 22 feet of depth per 100 foot of copper. But with this heavy steel, you get roughly 20 to 21 feet per 100 feet. But you can take a 300-foot spool of heavy steel and dump it in the back of the boat and reel it all right back on. Zero kinks, super user-friendly. I haven't got to experiment with it on Lake Erie, but I can tell you for the last 4 years I've run it on Lake Ontario, and I will never look at copper or lead core or mono again.
And when Mark's
the amount of fish in the lake with the wire line, I mean, it's a nightmare reeling fish all day too.
It's
That's
tough.
the thing.
Mono wire, which is single strand wire, is just hard to deal with.
It really kind of depends on what pattern you're fishing as well. Like a lot of the patterns that we fish, I would say from Avon, Cleveland, and west of there, typically you can get your baits to where they need to be with more conventional methods of getting your bait down. Either the bait itself is going to dive far enough. You can use snap weights to get your bait down. You can use Dipsy Divers to get your bait down. I would say where the wire's a big player on Lake Erie is once you start getting closer to the eastern basin, the east side of the central basin, where at that point you're just, again, you're fishing a mudflat at that point. It's just over 70 foot of water, and the fish are there just due to their migratory pattern. That's where guys tend to run wire a little bit more and have some good success on it. I've heard stories about how single strand wire puts a frequency in the water, and it's kind of like a calling card almost. I know some guys run the wire off their downriggers as well, and they say the downriggers will sing and call fish in. I don't know if any of that's true. I'm not a fish, I don't know.
I have no way to prove that.
It tends to be on the east side of the lake. A lot of the wire and copper comes into play a little bit more.
Yeah, I know on Lake Ontario, it's a huge player for me. That there are days over half my fish are going to come on junklet lines, on wire.
Next question comes from Chuck. He asked what the best months for the shallow structure bite are.
I would say for me, kind of once that water temp starts to creep towards like 55 degrees is usually like a really good starting point for me. like it's definitely a post spawn bite. If you look at smaller inland lakes and other bodies of water, that's typically where a post spawn bite would be, like an immediate post spawn bite would be. The fish spawn and they get up shallow near creek beds or where creeks are filtering into that body of water, and that's where they're going to find a lot of their bait. On Erie, it seems like 55 degrees, maybe up to, I mean, I don't know. I'll fish it until it gets bad enough with sheephead and white bass and white perch to where it just, you lose some of that efficiency catching those big fish. But about 55 degrees till whenever is when I'll fish that shallow stuff pretty hard.
And then Tom asked about Avon Point. He kind of wants you to go into more detail on that area.
So that's like my secret spot.
This is where I'm taking notes on this
It's
one.
not a secret. I touched earlier about Lowrance, the Genesis Live program, or the feature they have where you can make your own custom contour map. I spend a lot of time on Avon Point, and I've got a really, really good map made of it. So I feel like I'm able to be incredibly, incredibly efficient when I'm fishing that piece of structure because I know where every rock hump is, I know where every drop-off is, and I know exactly where it's at. It's not like a pre-bought Navionics card or a Lake Master chip where it's pretty accurate but not exact. Like I have an exact map of it where I can be very, very efficient in pinpointing some key areas there.
I love the Genesis Live. I use it everywhere I go. I mean, I travel across the country fishing different places, and it's really been a game changer for me. Next question, what is the best, we already answered that one. Let's see. How to deploy Dipsies. Mark, you can.
Yeah, there you go, Mark.
Oh, okay. I use a technique called speed setting. So if I have rods on my starboard side of the boat and I want to put, and I've been running 50, 60, and 70, 50 on a 1, 60 on a 2, 70 on a 3. I just landed a fish on my 3 setting. I want to put it back out to 70 and I want to put it back on that side of the boat. I will go to the other side of the boat. I will start that Dipsy in the water. I'll leave the clicker on. I won't thumb it, but I'm gonna set the tensioner so that line's coming off pretty fast, but not too fast. If it comes off too fast, you'll spin the Dipsy and it'll twist, and you'll get a tangle. So you want it to come just fast enough to not let the Dipsy spin. I'll let that out to about 60, and then once it hits 70, I'll put it back in the number 3 rod holder, close the bail, lock it down, and that Dipsy diver will float right into its position. It'll go right over the top of the other lines. So your 1 setting being the deepest, your 2 setting above the 1 setting, and then 3 being the highest. You can speed set them. You can run 4 Dipsies aside.
And if you're only going to run 1 Dipsy each side and you're targeting those tournament fish, definitely the 3 setting. I don't know about you. Most of my big fish come on the 3 setting.
Getting it away from the boat a little bit. Dipsies are a great tool for actually pounding bottom as well and stirring up some mud. I mean, if you looked at my Dipsies, it looks like someone took 40 grit sandpaper to the front of them and beat them up. Because I mean, and again, you're going to lose some tackle that way. I don't know how many Dipsies I lose a season, but I definitely lose more than a couple, just because
Especially
I
on
got
the point.
Yeah, I got them beating bottom, trying to stir up some mud and silt and break up some zebra mussels and cause some commotion to get fish looking at your bait.
Tom asks, can you talk about trolling with current versus against current and how trolling speeds should change with or against current? Well, there's a ton of current on Lake Erie. It's unavoidable.
Some spots have more current than others. Like Avon Point, for example. I mean, Avon Point has a ridiculous amount of current at times, and it's something where you really speed on your GPS, speed over ground is important, but what's more important is maybe getting in the ballpark from speed over ground, and then pay attention to your boards. Like, are your boards acting like the baits are pulling super, super hard? Are your boards just like sitting flat in the water like nothing's pulling on them? Is one side of the boat of boards, like, is it pushing a weird way or a certain way? And you can really let your boards dictate what kind of speed adjustments you should make with current. Current's usually a very, very good thing. Current positions fish especially when fishing structure, you want current. I mean, it definitely causes fish to hold on structure. But I wouldn't get too obsessed with it. Just pay attention to how your boards are running and try to make some changes so it looks like your boards, you know, where your bait is working at a good speed just by like the way the board's attitude is in the water.
Yeah, you'll notice too, like some days you'll be catching all your fish on one side of the boat. Typically that's because something's going on with the baits or the current. If I'm fishing spinners and there's a real heavy current in an area, sometimes those spinners with inline weights will actually push the bait up, or it'll push it down closer to bottom. So, you know, if I want to be 15 feet down with the spinner and I'm in heavy current, I could be 20 feet down, 7 feet down. The current can really affect the location of the spinner.
And for me, I use a fish hawk. I'm a huge
Yeah, a lot of
I-
guys do.
I know we had a little segment, and I didn't really get into it, but I live and die by my fish hawk on Lake Ontario, and I use it here on Lake Erie, and it's amazing how much current we have. Like the fish hawk will tell you. If I'm fishing 40 feet down, I'll run that fish hawk down 40 feet, and it definitely lets you know how much current's down there.
And then John asked, is it usually a slower troll through the mud?
No. Kind of one of those things where I let the fish dictate what kind of speed I want to go. When I drag cranks through the mud, I'll go as slow as 1.5 and I'll go as fast as 2.5. I don't typically like to fish much over 2.5 just because I don't like the way the inline boards run over a certain speed. That's where the big boards really shine when you start getting a little bit more speed. But I don't want to have my equipment and my tackle do things that they're not really designed for. Not that the offshore boards won't troll faster than that. I just don't tend to like the way they run. I have a harder time keeping a good spread, reading boards. Reading a small board at 2.5 miles an hour when you get a 16-inch fish can be pretty tough. On a big board, it's a heck of a lot easier. So, yeah, I would say speed is pretty just dependent upon the day and what the fish's mood is.
Lewis asked about what color crankbaits do you like to use for the walleye season? I don't get too hung up on colors, even though I have a million of them. But
that's probably one of the things I wish people would not pay as much attention to. I mean, honest to God, if you told me at the beginning of the year the only thing you're going to fish with is blue chrome, fire tiger, and maybe a purple and pink bait, I'd be like, that's fine. I'm a big fan of like green chromes personally, but I mean, walleye are apex predators on Lake Erie. They're not afraid of too much stuff. If it looks like a meal, they're gonna go for it. I mean, I really think having the correct action on your bait and having your bait at the right part of the water column is 10 times more important than color is.
I'd spend more time tuning crankbaits than picking out colors.
Yeah.
yeah, and it's all dependent too on the water clarity is the big one. The water clarity and the sun, those are the two things that we're looking at, and also what they're feeding on, you know.
I think chromes, if you pay more attention to a chrome bait or a painted bait, that's maybe a little more important than particular colors. And then when you're looking at colors too, just because your buddy's catching them on a white bait that's got pink polka dots and a green head and a yellow belly, it's a white-based bait. If you have a white-based bait that day, Wonder Bread probably worked just fine. I mean, it's a white-based bait. And then a chrome. If chromes are working that day, throw a couple chromes out there and see if that makes a difference. But I think I pay more attention to chromes versus painteds as opposed to going on the rabbit hole of, there's a million different painted baits and they'll all catch fish. So, but chrome can definitely make a big difference on certain days.
Going back to the current, do the walleye like to face the current? And that's just, it's hard to predict which way the current's coming from. So that one's kind of tough to answer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think fish will swim whatever way they have to get a meal.
Yeah, I mean, in a river situation, it would be different, but
right,
it's Lake Erie, and they're gonna do whatever.
Yeah,
that is a tough one to answer. Even on Lake Ontario, I would say I know the current will move the bait. So if I figure out which way the current's going, the bait is moving with that current.
You
so
can follow
I may
school.
extend my troll a little bit farther in that direction. I'm not so sure on Lake Erie.
Dan asked about bottom bouncers. Do we ever use those? Every once in a while, I'll throw a bottom bouncer out in the springtime, late spring. Sometimes I've had some success when those fish are post spawn and they're laying on bottom, but it's not something I use very often. I don't know about you, Luke.
Yeah, bottom bouncers for me tend to be more of like a spinner-oriented type rig. I don't run a lot of spinners right now. For whatever reason, you know, I'm not a fish. I don't know why, but crankbaits have always tended to catch. I've caught my biggest ever fish on a spinner, as funny as that is, but I think overall crankbaits tend to pull maybe more big fish. I could see that trend starting to change here pretty soon because we're getting to a time on Lake Erie where the 14 and 15 hatches, which were very, very good hatches, those fish are getting into that 5 to 6 pound range, and they're shortly in a few years going to be up in that 7 to 8 pound range. From a tournament standpoint, a few years ago, kind of when I first started, you were better off going and catching 2 8-pounders, and you would beat anybody that came in with, you know, 5 2 to 3 pound fish. The math didn't work, and I think that's changing here in the next few years to where it's going to be more important to maybe cycle through some more fish, just because there's going to be a plethora of 7 8 pound fish in the system here real shortly. And spinners do tend to catch more fish, but I think the cranks still catch bigger fish.
And you're covering more ground with cranks too, which is good.
A lot more ground.
Yep. Mark, we got a question for you from Chris. Why would you use a jet diver over a Dipsy diver?
Chris, I would use a jet diver off of my boards, and I would use a Dipsy diver just as a Dipsy diver. The jet diver is it doesn't have a directional ability, so it just goes straight back. You need the planer boards to take it out and away from the boat.
Awesome. One more. This is a popular one. I'm gonna even write this down. The hook that you use on your spoon. What's the name of that hook?
That is, I believe, a Matatsu 1/0 hook. I think it's a sickle barbarian hook. I just got turned onto it last year by a really good captain I know from Erie, and it shocked me. I was like, wow, man, we're really not losing any fish.
This guy could be getting some phone calls after this seminar.
Yeah, I want to say it's a Matatsu sickle hook. I unfortunately, the bag they came out like on 100. It was written in Sharpie, and it faded. And I tried to look it up for this seminar, and I can't think of it, but I'm almost positive it was a Matatsu.
Awesome. And then one that we skipped over here, Dan asked about the weight of the board, the small boards. I don't know the exact weight, but they are extremely light. They're made of plastic. They're not heavy at all. Not like you know what Mark would be using, but
Mine are heavy.
Yeah.
I think that's about it. No more questions. We're gonna wrap it up here. We just wanted to remind you guys that if you are interested in getting in that raffle, all the proceeds that benefit Youth Challenge and also Walleye for Wounded Heroes, that raffle is going to go until 8 p.m. Sunday night. And again, it's a great chance to win some fantastic prizes. A lot of the products that we've talked about, you can actually go on there and have a great chance of winning. We want to thank all you guys for tuning in, and I'm going to run through just a few people here that we would like to thank. We first of all would like to thank everybody that donated all these fantastic prizes to our raffle. It means a lot. We really appreciate it. We would really like to thank South Shore Marine for allowing us to come and put this on today. It was a really great opportunity, and I tell you what, this is why we do what we do, is for these questions. We love to talk fishing, so we enjoyed it just as much as you guys did. And also I want to thank Tom Mack, Will Kruger, Tom Martin, Mike Mannion, and also our guest speakers here. And most importantly, Grady White Boats. It wouldn't be possible without their support. So we appreciate you guys tuning in, and look for this next year. We'll be here same time, same date. Thank you.